everyone. Welcome to the New Mexico State Game Commission Department of Game and Fish State Commissioner meeting. Today is Thursday, June 25th, and it is an honor and it is a pleasure to be here with all of you here today. So thank you and welcome. It's a very good day here in New Mexico. It's a beautiful blue sky, sunny day. Director Michael Sloan, can you please proceed with a roll call?
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner Vesbach.
I'm here.
Commissioner Souls, I believe, is not here. Commissioner Lopez, also not present. Commissioner Kramer.
Here.
Commissioner Bates.
Here.
Vice Chair Salazar Henry.
Here.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Present.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Beautiful. Thank you, Director Michael Sloan. Before we proceed to our next agenda item, I would like to put out a shout out to the Department of Game and Fish. It is amazing what a remarkable job all of you continue to do during this state of COVID-19. Our state is proceeding very carefully, very cautiously to protect our citizens. You are also doing an excellent job with the environment, our game, our fish, and I just can't say how wonderful it is, what a great job you're doing. I'm also going to put out a shout out to an employee in your department. I think she deserves some recognition. Her name is Jenny Montoya. And I know that she does quite a bit of work behind the scenes supporting the department, you, Director Michael Sloan, and of course to the game commissioners. You have a phenomenal staff. And I'm looking forward to the report that you're going to provide to us today on what everybody is doing on the department. But in particular, I wanted to say a big thank you to Jenny and again to you, Director Michael Sloan.
Thank you.
Let us proceed to the next agenda item, which is the approval of this agenda. Do we have any kind of discussion on the agenda items? Okay, I have some silence here. So I think that means that the agenda.
I'd like a motion. I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, let's take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
I think we need a roll call. I think we need a roll call on a virtual meeting.
Oh, that is true. Okay, very good. Director Michael Sloan, can you please do a roll call?
Commissioner Vesbach.
Yes.
Commissioner Kramer.
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Vice Chair Salazar Henry.
Yes.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Director. Let us proceed on, I believe, with the consent agenda. Vice Chair Roberta Salazar Henry, I don't think we need any kind of discussion, although we do have some action items on A and B, but I believe we really don't need any kind of discussion. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, yes, unless somebody wants to pull something out of any of those consent agenda items to discuss, especially item B, if there's anything there that one of the commissioners would like to pull out and discuss, then we would have a discussion, but you're correct.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Well, do we have any need for discussion? Okay, do I have a motion on actions, items A and B?
I make a motion, we approve the consent agenda.
I second.
Very good. Director Michael Sloan, can you please take a roll call?
Commissioner Vestbach,
Yes.
Commissioner Kramer,
Yes.
Commissioner Bates,
Yes.
Vice Chair Salazar Henry,
Yes.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Yes,
Motion passes.
beautiful. Thank you, Director Michael Sloan. Moving right along, we have on our agenda something relatively new. As you'll recall, at our last meeting, we discussed the establishment of some committees, subcommittees. And I know that some of the members of the commission have met, not forming a quorum under the Open Meetings Act, but have indeed been working behind the scenes. And it would be good to hear from them some of their work, or at least some of the discussions and the issues that they've raised. So I'm going to start with finance. I believe that I'm going to turn that over to you, Vice Chair Roberta Salazar Henry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to let everybody know that's on this webcast that the Finance Committee is just awesome. We are well suited to working together, and the Department of Game and Fish staff that have interjected with us are just outstanding. So that's my plug for Commissioner Bates and Commissioner Vestbach, Director Sloan, Chief Varela, Assistant Director Cummins, et al., and all the folks, Lance, everybody that's been helping us. When we set up the Finance Committee, our goal was to assure the public that the New Mexico State Game Commission, acting under its fiduciary responsibility, is ensuring a sustainable department through the implementation and adequate review of sound legal and ethical financial management policies, as well as making sure there's adequate resources, financial and human, to advance the mission of the department. So that's our goal. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to work together with whatever the department needs to make sure that the programs are moving forward, that the money's properly being reported and accounted for, and that this commission body knows what's happening. And we're going to try to do that. And this is, I'm speaking on my behalf, without poking my fingers too far down into the game department, but at least have enough information that I feel comfortable and the commissioners feel comfortable with what is going on financially. We've had 2 meetings. We've met on April 27th and June 15th. And in those meetings, we were given various financial documents that we requested. It had to do with the financial condition of the department and any financial transactions that are moving through the department and the overall structure of the department. We were given documents that explained all the legal rules or statutes that are tied to the different funds. We were given, we asked for and have been given information on license sales trends, budget impacts, and any issues or an update to the 5-year federal audit and the annual audit and the LFC audit. In regard to the 5-year audit, that is still being worked through with the department and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I'm assuming we'll have something in the next couple of 3 months. With the LFC audit, they are supposedly going to have a report to the LFC probably July or August. And we don't know what's there yet. So we don't have any preliminary information there. And so at the June meeting, we talked again about being able to start having the department perform some presentations to the public periodically to give the public information about the finances of the department and how well things are going. And so today's presentation by Chief Varela is a culmination of all the discussions we've had for the last couple of months. And I would just turn it over to Commissioner Bates and Commissioner Becksbach for any comments they'd like to make.
Well, I just say the staff has been extremely informative. They're very well versed. I think they have a very good plan laid out by the director and his leadership team. And Roberta, with your leadership, it's been outstanding in working with Jeremy. So we're really getting our feet wet. But looking at 5 years out, the director has a great plan. That looks to me like I'm just happy to be part of the team, and I look forward to moving forward.
I just second that. I think it's invaluable for us to be able to spend this extra time going over and understanding our budget, our challenges, and our opportunities ahead. We have a lot of big capital opportunities out there, and obviously a lot of needs to service the public in New Mexico. So I think it's just really valuable, and thank the committee chair and the staff on that.
That's all I have, Madam Chair. I'll turn it back to you. Unless anybody has any other questions, but I think I would just say that Chief Barella's presentation will probably be it will be very informative, and the commission will have a great opportunity to ask him questions.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Finance Committee. Thank you, Vice Chair Salazar Henry, and of course, Commissioners Vesbach and Bates. Excellent report. Turning over to our next subcommittee, that is customer and stakeholders. I would like to hear from our chair on that, and that is Commissioner Kramer.
Yes, ma'am. The committee consists of Commissioner Lopez and myself, and we have talked several times. So our charge was to find the best way to get feedback from our customers and stakeholders, and to look at current practices, industry standards, and then make some suggestions. And thanks to Lance and his crew, we got what New Mexico Department of Game and Fish is doing. Arizona Game and Fish got back with us we developed a questionnaire and have sent it out to lots of different entities, and we've really only gotten Arizona Game and Fish back. They had some very good ideas. I've talked on the phone to a couple of other folks, and Terzio's working on it as well. So we're getting that together. We have some good ideas. Just a side note on the industry standards. Every single person I've talked to has said that Lance Cherry is the industry standard.
Oh,
and he is. He does
another shout out.
So, you know, that they always feel like they're catching up with him, and then he comes up with something else, and then they've got to catch up with him again. So appreciate him and his crew. But we're getting some good ideas, and we're working on it well.
Wonderful report. Thank you. And as for the next committee, overarching organizational and hunt structure, those are being led by Commissioner Souls, who is not here today. So at this point, I think we can proceed
Madam
on.
Chair? Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
The Hunt Structure Committee is a separate committee, and it's being led by Commissioner Vesbach, with myself and David Souls as members.
Oh, okay. I apologize, Commissioner Vesbach. Can you give us a report on the hunt structure?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so the Hunt Structure Committee is chaired by myself and with Vice Chair Salazar Henry and Commissioner Souls. So far, we've had I'd say we're in the analysis phase. We had one kickoff meeting and set the scope, which is, you know, we just kind of ruled out what we're not going to look at, which is things like how many licenses per unit are set. Those that are a little more on the biology side, we're ruling that out, or whether how heavily we harvest exotics, that type of thing. And we're really going to focus on the allocation of licenses. And that means, so like I said, we had one meeting, set the scope and the timeline. Timeline for the big game rule is 2022. That development happens kind of through the year there, where the department staff spends a lot of time on that. So we have some time to really analyze, make sure we're setting good input opportunities, working with the department. And so then, of course, we have yearly in late summer, we normally look at what our legislative agenda might be. So those are, kind of the timeframes we're looking at. We'll have reports back. I think next report is really going to be what we delve into and decide we need to focus on analyzing in terms of finances of the department, how that affects it. And so there's a whole lot of questions there. We get a lot of input around the way our hunts are allocated, obviously. And I think, so far it's just, again, as in the finance committee, it's really valuable to get this extra time with staff to really get a better understanding of how all our systems work right now. Before, and I think it makes sure we have better opinions as commissioners when we have decisions come before us. So that's essentially where we're at, just in the analysis stage right now, really trying to approach this slowly and deliberately. We have some time, and I don't know if Vice Chair Salazar Henry has anything to add there.
I think the only thing I would like to add is I think the focus of this is getting that right and getting how we bring public comment in for our public process. Those are the two things that I think we'll work hardest on, is to make sure that we have public input, but also that we are not sliding into things that we probably shouldn't be. And so we're hoping that with all the expertise in the game department, they will keep us on our path. But it's an exciting committee, and I look forward to some of the new ideas and concepts we may come up with. And I think Jeremy, as the commissioner leading this, is the perfect person. His ability to straddle both the hunting and the conservation communities is invaluable when we start looking at the hunt structure. That's all.
Actually, Commissioner Vesbach, I'd like to suggest a couple of things. And thank you, Vice Chair Salazar Henry. I agree and echo everything that you just said regarding getting public comment. On that particular point, Commissioner Vesbach, be sure to tap Commissioner Kramer from time to time. Public comment kind of taps into that subcommittee work of customer stakeholder feedback. And so I think that is a very important connection from time to time. But again, always being mindful of the Open Meetings Act. The second thing that I'd like to point out to you, Commissioner Vesbach, on this committee work is that when speaking or thinking and considering anything regarding the hunt and our structure, that is very compliance driven. And that is very compliance driven. And be sure to look at our rules, our New Mexico state statutes. I know you do, but it's the framework of what we are doing. And you didn't bring it up, but I know it's there. So just wanted to remind you about that.
Oh, Madam Chair, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, that's a big part of what we're doing is view of the guidelines we have in law, guidelines and sideboards we have in law and rule. And so, yeah, it's just, it's an exciting thing to look into though. And, I think really looking forward to continuing with it.
Thank you. Okay, if we have, do we have any other comments or questions from the commissioners regarding any of those committee reports?
I do not.
Shall we proceed to the next agenda item, which is the director's report? It's another new item on the agenda.
Madam Chair, thank you. So I guess the first thing I'd like to report on is that just yesterday we received a final order District Court for a civil case for restitution on a trophy poaching case. The amount of that restitution ordered was $74,000 for a mule deer buck that scored 232.9 points. That is a very large civil restitution, $20,000 for the animal, $54,000 for the investigation, that effort, and the cost to cover that. So we're very excited about that. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the dedication and perseverance of all of our officers and their ceaseless pursuit of wildlife violators, and our legal staff for the support and argument. We do anticipate that this likely will be appealed. We feel like we have a strong case to hold the $74,000. So that's a big win for the department in particular, and we're excited about it. Moving on, Kirk's going to talk a little bit about this in his presentation, but I'd like to highlight that after 3 years of treatment on Whitewater Creek down near Glenwood, New Mexico, sampling has resulted in no finding of non-native DNA in the stream, meaning that we got all of the non-native fishes out. So we will be beginning to stock that sometime later this summer or fall, and that will add a significant amount of Gila trout habitat to the restoration pot, if you will. And so again, very excited about that. As some of you may know, we found that we had a form of pneumonia in the herd of bighorn sheep in the Rio Grande Gorge. Rather than take action immediately to kill off those that might be coughing or showing signs, Chief Liley made the decision to go ahead and dart some of those animals during this period, get collars on them. Information thus far seems to indicate we're seeing very little mortality. We are seeing a good lamb to ewe ratio, about 80%. So we feel like while they might have the disease, there doesn't seem to be a significant effect at this point, and we're continuing to monitor that. Between the states of Arizona and New Mexico, we were able to get 20 cross-fostered pups out into dens earlier this year. That's a record, which is pretty amazing to accomplish during the current circumstances. We had assistance from the captive rearing facilities and donations of aircraft time to get these animals from the various places where the captive facilities are here to New Mexico. And so that's very exciting. It's also exciting that we did hire our wolf field team lead, and we just received the list for our wolf biologists. So we'll be working through those and holding interviews before too long. So the wolf program is really getting up and running, and it's obviously starting off with a record attempt is a great start. We continue to work on the Gila elk capture and elk movement study. Between Arizona and New Mexico, they captured about 200 calves, collared them, and set them loose. So we'll get that much more data coming in the future as we continue to analyze what's been coming in. We have a number of ongoing habitat projects across the state, in particular on some of our wildlife management areas, like the Sargent. I'm sure you're all aware that we sent notice out to the primary zone E+ participants of how many licenses and incentive licenses they received. You, like us, have probably fielded a number of emails and telephone calls. We continue to work through those, answer questions. I think we're generally satisfying people. I think that we're in a much better position in terms of having a very structured and understandable system of issuance of those tags. So I think that's a positive for us. We've developed and implemented strong online services, as this meeting is one example of that. Also in July, we will be starting up online hunter education classes, sort of in person via Zoom. So that's very exciting. We've worked with a vendor to be able to provide the test, and then we'll do the actual hands-on portion of the test via Zoom. So that's an exciting development we've got going. We've returned to stocking according to our normal schedule. So we're moving fish out. People seem to be very appreciative of that. We have ongoing fishery studies across the state, looking both at YY super males, which again, you'll hear some more about later, as well as, the trout fishery at Eagle Nest and the kokanee fishery at Navajo. Our officers continue to be a presence in the field, ensuring compliance with wildlife laws. In particular, we're seeing a lot of OHV use and trying to both educate and inform folks about where they can recreate with those and the damage that they can cause if they're not careful. And the last thing I guess I would like to highlight is that we've entered an agreement with tourism and energy, minerals, and natural resources for a New Mexico True campaign directed at responsible outdoor recreation. In particular, our portion will focus on fishing and OHV use, but it's a multi-agency effort to try to encourage folks to be responsible when they're recreating, pack it in, pack it out, those sorts of things. So that's an exciting thing for us to be engaged in and to partner with some other agencies on. And I guess I said it was the last thing, but I do have one more thing with your indulgence, Madam Chair. I'd like to take a few minutes to show a video that we prepared to both highlight the efforts of the department staff and to thank staff for the incredible perseverance, innovation, and dedication they've shown, especially during these difficult times.
Please, Director, proceed with the video.
It never ceases to amaze me the work this agency can get done, especially in the hard times. We come together. The past few months have been unprecedented in our lifetimes, filled with uncertainty, highlighted by the unknown, and laying bare our greatest strengths and weaknesses. We've been challenged to make it work. Has it been easy? Not at all. But we've come together under the common mission of conserving New Mexico's wildlife for present and future generations. From day one, our IT team has jumped in to make a difference. They've ensured that our employees are able to be as productive at home as they are at work, distributing laptops, cell phones, hotspots, and then following that up by answering all the questions folks had about how to be productive using these new tools and working remotely. All the while making sure that our system is as secure as it possibly can be. Others in IT have delivered the draw, but not just delivered it a week early. They've updated the e-tagging app, and they've made sure that we've been able to search our systems to meet the IPRA requirements. The Fisheries Management Division has been closely monitoring fish hatcheries, making sure we don't have overcrowding and making sure we're stocking fish where people can access them. Fish biologists have been busy developing a study on Eagle Nest Lake to look at the pike rainbow trout interactions. To do this, they had to tag 25,000 fish at Red River Hatchery. It may sound relatively simple, but it's not. With just 5 people, 25,000 fish to tag, no social interaction, getting them loaded on a truck, getting them to the lake, and getting them stocked is quite a challenge. That's the kind of innovation and perseverance that we've seen across the agency. Field Operations has modified their practices to ensure more social distancing. They've been conducting OHV patrols in high-use areas, especially as young adults and teens are looking for things to fill their time. They're ensuring that public needs are being met and continuing to look for ways to safely patrol alone rather than in groups. As restrictions lift, many New Mexicans are brushing off spring fever by heading to nearby lakes and streams, heading out for a hike, or taking a boat to the lake. Officers are working to educate new recreationists about license requirements, legal equipment, bag and possession limits. Now, there have been some poaching cases. Officers are patrolling the state and working to reduce the number of illegally taken animals. The Ecological and Environmental Planning Division is busy commenting on documents that will have long-term effects on wildlife and the landscapes they live in. They have also moved an electronic sign to the quest area to remind travelers about wildlife in the area, as well as continuing efforts on curlew surveys. Our information and education team has found new ways to innovate, such as virtual hunter education and instructor training, have successfully hosted commission meetings, and have produced special e-newsletters
and modified fishing reports to continue communicating with our customers while supporting public health. Over 60 educational activities have been developed, reviewed, and shared on our website and social media sites. And weekly hunter education instructional videos have been shared across the nation. These have been a great hit. Wildlife Management Division innovated ways to conduct the Gila elk capture with only 5 people on site. Gould's turkey have been captured and fitted with GPS backpacks to provide more accurate population information. An ongoing project to collar and capture bighorn sheep in the Rio Grande Gorge will provide vital herd health information. An outbreak of rabbit hemorrhagic disease has also brought attention to New Mexico's domestic and wild rabbit populations, resulting in the need for testing. Our customer service representatives continue to work with the public to ensure questions are being answered and information is being shared. All our financial specialists are working to ensure that bills are paid, contracts are in place, federal grants are administered, and all other agency obligations are being met, all the while preparing for the upcoming fiscal year. The department is exceeding expectations to ensure that our state's wildlife are being conserved, and for that, I am very thankful and proud. The COVID-19 pandemic has challenged us to change our ways of doing business and will continue to do so. New Mexicans once filled their time with youth sports and school concerts are now looking to spend time enjoying our state's vast natural resources. Areas that are open to the public are now filling with people. More people can be seen carrying fishing poles and heading to local hotspots. We are all fielding questions about where we can go, how to fish, how to camp, and all manner of other outdoor-related questions. Our way of doing business also continues to evolve. We'll now be wearing face masks and gloves, living behind glass partitions, meeting and working remotely, and maintaining as much social distance as possible. The COVID-19 pandemic will continue to change us long into the future. While we may not know exactly what that looks like, I continue to encourage every employee to get creative, work with others, and look for solutions to better manage our state's wildlife. I ask, what will our future customers look like? How do we engage and educate them? How do we work in small teams to do what large teams once did? How can we continue to learn lessons from current challenges and prepare our agency for future uncertainties? I'm confident that the way we do business will forever be altered by COVID-19. How much better will our services and wildlife populations be? Only time will tell. But with the efforts this agency has made, the adaptations that we have quickly implemented, and the strength of us all pulling together, I am confident that New Mexico's wildlife has never been in better hands.
Madam Chair,
It's my report.
Yes, Vice Chair Roberta Salazar Henry.
a point of personal privilege. This agency does so much with so little. It affects our citizens, affects our wildlife, regardless of what end of the spectrum you are on loving wildlife. And to do this with such a small staff and such a small limited budget in a way that has such a huge impact. I spent 25 years there. And I am so honored to be a part of this group. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Salazar Henry. Do I have any other commissioners that would like to say something?
I would just like to say, this is Commissioner Kramer. I would just like to say, particularly to Colonel Griego and all the law enforcement agents out there, that officers, that we appreciate what they're doing, appreciate their work. It's a tough environment, and we understand the discouragement and disappointments, but just know that we're behind you, we're for you, and we appreciate what you do. That's it.
Well, I'm very touched. I am very honored, Director Michael Sloan. When you serve as a chair, you think of a leadership, but I feel like very humbled every time I come to the commission or to the department, because it is you, not us. It's the people that do the great work for the state of New Mexico and for our environment, for our fish. And so I think what I would summarize and say is bravo. Que viva Department of Game and Fish, New Mexico State Game Commission, to our public. So many, what I noticed in the video, all of the game. I was happy to see the bear. I kind of missed the wolves. I didn't see some pups, but I know what you're doing. So I think Director or Commissioner Souls will have something to report on that in August. I know there are owls. I know you do many things with birds. And I hope for our next commission, we can get another video describing some of the work that you've been doing. The video was excellent. Your report was excellent, along with everyone else. So thank you. That was very good. It is 10 minutes before 10. Commissioners or director, if you can excuse me for just a second. We can move right on to our next report or agenda item. And I guess the question is, do you want to take a break or would you like to continue? Okay, let's continue. Next is the initiation of game management unit boundary rule. This is a discussion item, no action. Yes, Commissioner Stewart, Lively.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, can you all see the presentation on your screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Yes.
looks like it's starting the end of it. So yeah, briefly what this is our boundary description for our game management units. The delineation of individual game management units has specific boundaries that we follow. It helps with the law enforcement in terms of letting people know where it is, where you shouldn't be. Also, the maps that are derived from it, it's in, as you've seen in all of our rules and information booklets. What we're doing here is, or asking to do, is a cleanup of some of it. We'll go through some of the specific issues that are in the rule that need some cleanup. Now, none of these changes would affect the hunts that are currently ongoing or anything of that manner. It's more of clarification, so we have really discrete boundaries that hunters can follow, and everyone understands what the boundaries are. Some of it also is going right into the presentation. Some are some neighboring GMUs where we've had some overlap and due to descriptions in the boundary rule where that piece of property actually exists in 2 game management units. And I'll show some descriptions or pictures so you get a better visual idea of what this is, of what we're talking about. And then we have some issues where it leaves a gap between some property or lands that leave a gap between 2 GMUs that's really not in any one GMU. And then we have a proposed area reassignment in 1 GMU. Again, it won't affect hunting because it's in a city center. That's part of, not necessarily hunting occurs there, but it's in a GMU where it probably appropriately is not. So getting into some of these, this is an example where we have neighboring GMUs that overlap each other. This is on White Sands Missile Range in Fort Bliss. What happened here is the description of the Doñana Range Camp was included in both GMU 19 and GMU 28. It's not necessarily being hunted, but what we're proposing to do is it only be as mentioned in the boundary description rule in GMU 19. So you'll see a hard boundary along this line here, if you could see my pointer along the highway. So what we're proposing again there is just to move that portion of property hatched in red into the GMU 19 portion, and now it won't be included in the descriptions in both in 19 and in 28. Another example of where we have a gap, this portion of GMU 34 wasn't included, or that red hatched line was not included in any particular GMU. Between 34 and 28, we're proposing that be specifically put into GMU 34. Again, right now, it's kind of it's not described in any of the rules. It would just be proposed to be moved into GMU 34. Another one that leaves a gap or doesn't have any specific boundary to it, and this is Holloman Air Force Base specifically. It's not necessary that we're going to hunt Holloman Air Force Base, but we want to be able to put it into a GMU, so it's in a description of a boundary. It's not defined in any boundary rule right now, so it'd be included into part of GMU 19. And here's the one where we're talking about a reassignment of an area that's currently in a GMU, but we think it's more appropriate to put it in another GMU. You'll see there that the actual city of Las Cruces, the main town of Las Cruces, was actually included in GMU 19. We think it makes more sense to just follow the I-25 boundary along there and put that into GMU 25. Again, I don't think it's going to do anything from a hunting perspective because it's right in the middle of town, but it just makes sense from a boundary description that we don't have this jog in the boundary rule that goes around the city of Las Cruces and puts it into 19. Other things that we are planning on or proposing changing is corresponding to some actual features. So for example, the boundary rule for GMU 19 says follow White Sands Missile Range where it intersects US 54. Well, it no longer intersects US 54. So we need to do a boundary description that is accurate. So it really needs to say something like south and east along the boundary of Fort Bliss. So it's more clarifying that language to ensure that we have definable boundaries on where that is. The other thing that's happened is the boundary rule hasn't been modified in recent history. Road names have changed some, or they were incorrectly cited previously. For example, in GMU 15, the correct name of a road is Green Gaps Road. In the boundary rule, it's labeled as Road BO 40, which does not exist anymore. It's a closed road by the Forest Service. So those are the kind of examples, again, not changing the actual depiction of the unit that we have displayed for hunters, but clarifying what that actual boundary is. And then other issues of including sufficient detail for a complete boundary description. For example, GMU 33 leaves out a stretch between US Highway 380 and Lee County Road 156. So we just need to complete that boundary description. So yes, it'll still follow the lines that we depict on the maps, but the language in the actual rule has to coincide with that description. And then, for example, reflect updated changes on the ground. This is where maybe roads have been decommissioned or no longer on maps, and we need to go with it. A prime example is in GMU 9, McKinley County Road 19A was rerouted, and now it's off New Mexico 509 due to mining activity. So we just need the boundary line won't change. We just need to change the language in that boundary rule to coincide with what's been going on the ground. With that, I take questions. I think, again, this is nothing changing our act would affect hunters or the hunting or licenses that are already in place. It's just a clarification in the language in the boundary rule. We look to come back to the commission at the next meeting with adoption with this. We would, instead of, some of these meetings that do take a little bit more public input, have impacts to hunters on the ground, we do go out and have those. Again, this is more of a clarification. We will put the rule and summary of the rule on the website following this meeting and accept public comments. If we get something substantial that we think is something we missed or thought that we need to take more time to analyze before we come back to you, we will. But our hope is to come back to you in the August commission meeting for adoption of these changes. And with that, I'd take any questions.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Vesbach.
So Chief Lively, I mean, this makes sense, very straightforward cleanup. But I wonder, we get comments on all kinds of things. Have we gotten any kind of consistency or interesting comments in terms of other types of changes since we are now looking at unit boundaries?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vesbach. So one of the things that we have discussed, yes, when we started discussing it, there are probably some boundaries that better fit in a different GMU or areas that should be realigned along. For example, GMU 45 and 46, there's an administrative Forest Service boundary versus a land ownership Forest Service boundary. Right now, the GMU is following the administrative boundary versus the land ownership. We think those should be changed, but that has large implications for hunter licenses that have already been distributed. It has large implications for the E+ system. So we will go back and revisit those when we open up the big game rules and we open up those other rules, because that's when we think the discussion about, are these boundaries meeting what our hunt objectives are, or are they on, should we change to reflect population status? So when we go through the big game rule development, as you mentioned in 2022, we'll open that rule at the same time in concert as we move through with all the big game rules to adjust for changes that reflect and harvest needs and population goals. So this again is just a cleanup, but those bigger issues that will affect hunting licenses, distribution of hunts, where people go, what happened during that big game rule development.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you. And then just a related question on that bigger picture, longer term 2022 question. Has the department looked at, I've seen some states have moved to simplify, their rules and regulations, and it can be one of the biggest barriers to people either getting into hunting or dropping out of hunting when they move to a new state. Like, we get so intimately familiar with our rules and information booklets that it's second nature. But I think we have 59, if I'm about, different units, and have we ever looked at the idea of trying to simplify or combine or just make things more understandable and accessible for new people? And I know that's a touchy subject, but just wondered about it, because I have seen other states actually do that, try to simplify where it really wasn't really necessary biologically to split people into all these different areas.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vesbach, for sure. And there's been some of the discussions as we, I guess, would put in a bin to discuss at the big game rule as we start doing, what do we need to clarify in this boundary rule? Some of those issues come up. Do we need a 6A, B, C? Is that right for the management? Or do we need a 16A through E? Or can we combine some of those into larger GMUs? Some of that discussion points go around hunter density and those kind of issues. On the more units you combine, higher hunter density that you potentially could have in one given area. So yes, there has been discussions. I think it is imperative to have that when we do the rule development for those, like you said, with the big game development. But the simplification of that definitely could potentially happen. And we are looking into ways where if those boundaries don't make a biological sense, let's try to combine them and go down the line. So you'll see that as we come up with the big game rule development, some of those recommendations.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Commissioners, questions?
None.
Wonderful. Well, we look forward to your report, Officer Stewart, and let's proceed on to our next agenda item from Lance Cherry. the initiation of the hunter education rule.
All right. I trust you can see the presentation all right.
Yes.
So, Madam Chair, I'm here today to discuss the department's mentored youth program and changes we would like the commission to consider. To begin, I want to provide just a little brief history and highlight some of the original intent and purpose of the department's mentored youth hunt program. So in 2011, it was an eye-opening year for fish and wildlife agencies all across the country. Headlines began to explode with news that hunting and fishing participation was on the decline. And agencies like ours turned to what we know best, which is the science. And through an extensive research, we began to understand the causes of the shift in the behavior. Among the many things that we learned were the primary reasons for that decline. So on the hunting side, the lack of exposure, lack of hunting success, lack of mentors, hunter education requirements, and lack of skills-based training really stood out to us. We knew we could tear down those barriers and deliver our services in a better way. So at the time, one of the many initiatives that we chose to push forward was the Mentored Youth Hunt Program. The program provided an opportunity for first-time hunters to gain valuable knowledge from their field experiences prior to stepping foot into a hunter education certification class. That program focused on engaging responsible adults to invest in providing a hands-on education, hands-on skills-based education for their young hunters. The department sought to improve student success rates while also ensuring that our safety record remained unblemished. In 2012, the department presented a framework for the program to the commission. And with their approval, that hunter ed rule was changed and amended, and New Mexico became the 34th state to adopt this families in the field style approach. So in the spirit of exercising caution, the rule was then subsequently amended to include a minimum age and to specify allowable species for a mentored youth to hunt. Today, 47 states have passed some type of apprentice license, and more than 2,000 such licenses have been sold nationwide. Current data also shows that apprentice hunters are 4 times safer than the average hunter. Under our current rule, mentored youth may only hunt with a licensed parent, guardian, or another licensed adult with the consent of the parent or guardian who's within unaided voice and sight distance. Our mentored youth are limited to hunting small game, turkey, deer, and javelina, and registration is currently available for youth 10 years of age and 10 years of age and under the age of 18, and it's valid for a period of 2 consecutive license years. After that second license year, anyone under 18 needs to apply and complete a full course in our hunter education program to purchase or apply for a firearm hunting license. At this time, the department always places safety of our hunters and anglers first. And when it comes to our youth, those considerations are truly amplified. We've actively engaged in monitoring the program and have tracked participation very closely. And we're confident that now's the time for us to request your consideration to once again modernize this program and amend that rule to allow first-time hunters age 8 years of age or older the ability to hunt small game, turkey, deer, javelina, and also add pronghorn antelope for the 2 license years in the department's mentored youth program. This proposed age rollback would more effectively align with the minimum age requirement of 10 for online hunter education certification and provide that critical field experience that aids in the effectiveness of our total hunter education program. It's our desire for students to follow our education plan in its totality rather than skipping steps based on age requirements. So in closing, I'm very proud of the rapid response this agency has had in our commissions to address the needs of our customers. It's not surprising to me that we're one of the first 2 states to reverse the participation decline and have a seat at the table as the National Recruitment, Retention, and Reactivation, they often call it R3 leader. Later this year, I plan to come back to you to share more about that and about our efforts and highlight those things that helped us rise to the top. But today, what I'm asking is for your assistance to help us continue to be responsive to our future customers' needs and help us restore the intent of this once successful program. And so with that, I will stand for questions.
Commissioners, any questions? Comments?
Madam
Vice Chair?
I guess I have several questions, and I know I'm one of the people that's very proud of the Department of Game and Fish of not being on the downward trend for license holders and license buyers, excuse me. And we have a lot of different use-only hunts already in the current hunt structure in order to accomplish all the things that you're talking about. And so this program has been online since 2012. And so you've got at least 7 years worth of data. So those original participants, do you follow them through to see if they continue on being a license buying adult? Or what percentage are we actually recruiting in and that are staying with us? And I'm just looking, you know, we have so many different use only stuff that it's kind of hard to tease it out, but I would like to know, especially with this program, since you've been tracking it, that first piece of, and then I have several other questions.
So, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Salazar Henry, so we definitely are able to track, and we have been watching the behaviors of the students over time. The biggest thing is that when this program initially started, we had thousands of participants, and it's slowly migrated to hundreds just because of the new opportunities that we have for them to get their hunter education certification, whether online, field days, or live fire type courses. And so there's so many different things that they can do at an early age that they jump into, and it really kind of circumvented this aspect. What we have found is that the earlier we can start our kids in learning how to hunt and become active, the more proficient they become, the more successful, and the more avid they become over time. And so, you know, we're one of about 8 states that really don't have a minimum age requirement set in place, and one of the states that has that opportunity to bring our youth into what we do early. And so with our students who have participated through Mentor Youth, went through Hunter Ed, and then ultimately begin to hunt, we find that there is a greater success rate of them continuing, as opposed to students who just show up, take Hunter Ed, and then participate. In fact, for a while there, we had looked at how our Hunter Ed program was performing, and it's been a couple years since we took a really tight look at this component, but just a couple years ago when we looked at it, about half of our Hunter Ed graduates were going on to buy licenses, and about half of the students were not. And what we kind of found was that most of the time what they were lacking was that parental support or that parent, guardian, or mentor. And this program kind of puts that in place on the front end. It front loads it.
So given that, because this is all about recruitment and retention, and I'm assuming that all the use only hunts are about recruitment and retention. Otherwise, why would we just segregate those out? Why wouldn't we change how we deal with youth coming into hunting by making it a requirement that they go through this program first before they're allowed to take Hunter Ed? I mean, if you want recruitment and retention, and this is the best way to develop responsible hunters and that bonding between mentors and young kids, it seems like we have 2 different processes trying to get at the same thing. And one's more successful than the other, and one looks like more responsible than the other if you're talking about doing things right and keeping them. Because that's what you're saying, is if they start in this program, they stay with us. and they're better hunters as well. So I guess I'm confused about that. And then I'd like for you to explain to me why you think that we should expand an 8-year-old into antelope, especially into a species that it's extremely hard to get a regular hunter a license for, or if you see that only being a private land donation type thing. Explain to me the antelope, expanding out into antelope.
So, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Salazar Henry. So I'll start with the first part of your question and in addressing our desires and our plan and path in our education program. I think what's most important to recognize is that we have to meet our customers where they are and with the services that they need most. And for some, they just won't engage with their kids at that earlier, younger age. They will wait. It's quite often that our students are in that 10 to 18 range more often than not, more often than any of the others. And they will continue to just jump into the first available opportunity they have, get their certification, and be done with our program. What this really does is that this gives us an opportunity for those handful of folks who are truly invested and dedicated to teaching their children how to hunt and so forth, to have a program that really caters to encouraging them to do just that. And so I always look at this as a piece of the bigger picture also. That's why we offer so many types of hunter education certification courses. That's why we have online, why we have traditional classes, why we have field days, and why we're stepping into the realm of this virtual hunter ed course in the upcoming month. Is that it's just really important that we go catch them all. In addition to that, you know, I really do look at the value of the recruitment side of what we do on our R3 work as being catching all those individuals who really would sustain us for the long term, the long-term future. And so at this point, it really isn't just about the kids. It's also about their parents and the age groups that are set kind of right in between. And so we have lots of different programs and lots of approaches that reach all those variety of folks. For us, when we think about bringing a kid in at a very young age of 8, we think that it's important that we have a program that pushes them through this specific step and process. Now, when it comes to pronghorn and my desires to add pronghorn to it, it really does come to a lot to do with that change that occurred within our antelope system, and a lot to do with those private landowners. Those private landowners have opportunities that sometimes they often pass up. And I always have thought that it's a tragedy when at minimum they don't at least bring their grandkids in or offer those opportunities to those that next generation of conservationists first. And so this would just give us an opportunity to provide that same kind of push that we put across other programs. In addition to that, pronghorn antelope, well, there isn't a bounty of opportunity necessarily. Those few opportunities that they are quite similar to a lot of the other species that we're allowing these mentor youth to hunt. Antelope is a fantastic species for us to use as a first hunt opportunity. In fact, it's one of the incentive hunts that we provide with our hunter ed program that we draw out every year from private land donations for some of our top performers in our hunter ed classes. And it's just the right size species to go out, harvest, and teach a young hunter how to field dress, how to process, and how to take it literally from field to fork. And so that's an important piece to us. And we really do hate not having that opportunity opened up for us to continue pushing with some of our camps and hunts and those kinds of things that we do.
I guess I feel like with the bountiful number of deer hunting licenses, both on private and public, and that size of animal, and the fact that it really is not as hard to get a deer license versus it is for people to get an antelope license. Right now at this point, I don't understand the need to expand into an additional species. But I guess I need to hear some more and think about it some more. I just have a hesitancy to expanding, especially an 8-year-old hunting, first time hunting into antelope, where a 65-year-old is still trying to get a license, even on those expanded public opportunities. If it was something where it was pretty easy to find a place to go hunt, I understand that. But I think right now, it's between small game, javelina, turkey, deer, there's a lot for 8-year-olds if you're wanting to go all the way down to an 8-year-old. That was my other question. Are you having a high demand request from parents saying my 8-year-old needs to be in this? We need an opportunity to deal with an 8-year-old. Where did the 8-year-old number come from?
So, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, Salazar Henry. So where that really comes from is that for the most part now, most of our students that continue in the traditional path, because we have a minimum age of 10 in place for online hunter ed, fall in that 8 and 9-year-old category. And 8 years old is really about the age that a student gets to where they tend to comprehend the material that they need to learn. Even in the mentored youth program, they have to pass a small test. And what you find is that youth that are under age 8 typically don't have the skill set to fully understand multiple choice type tests or questions, and tend to not be that successful in it. And so it's really based on looking at some of those needs of our students out there. It's also taken into strong consideration that this public health crisis that we've been living in has created some true barriers for those students to chase those traditional classroom type settings. And so we want to continue to have that same success that we've had bringing young hunters into hunting, and by eliminating some of those barriers, but still looking at that same age class that is successful within our program. And so that's where we drop that out. We don't go lower. We don't think of it as lower. It really just fits very nicely right up against our online hunter ed program as well, where they can have this mentored opportunity. They got a couple years to really learn something before they step foot into an online environment. And we know they've had some hands-on skills to understand the content in an online environment better.
I appreciate that. And Madam Chair, can I ask Commissioner Vesbach? He has young kids that he hunts with that I would really like to hear his. I know we don't agree, he and I don't agree on some things when it comes to youth hunting, but I'd really like his perspective about an 8-year-old hunting, starting at 8, whatever. And I know Commissioner Bates also has kids that he hunts with.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I may chime in because I too have children and they have hunted with us when they were young. So let's start with Commissioner Vesbach and then Commissioner Bates.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Well, first off, I just want to start and say, when this Families of Field program started across the U.S., I really took I love hunter safety so much. And I think like a lot of hunters went, wait a minute, what's this about? But so I started out initially skeptical and became completely convinced by this mentored hunter opportunity. Was very supportive of what the department did to start that up here in New Mexico. And I think, Lance is so passionate about getting kids outdoors and into the, just what we all love about being outside and hunting and fishing, that I think sometimes he's also very understated and humble sometimes. And so I just want to recognize something he mentioned, that we're one of just very few states that have a reverse trend in terms of outdoor participation for hunting and fishing. So that's really worth noting. And I think, another thing is when my kids were going through hunter safety, which is not that long ago, but it feels like a long time ago now, it was hard to get into a hunter safety class. You had to hurry up and get your kids in there before they were full. And, my oldest daughter, we had to drive pretty far to get into a hunter safety class because we couldn't get it. We didn't make it into the close one fast enough. And so what Lance said about this going from thousands to hundreds using that is also a victory, because those hunter safety classes have become more accessible. And so I just really appreciate the dedication to that. And then on the two specific questions here in terms of pronghorn and the proposals in 8 years old that Vice Chair Salazar Henry brought up. I will say I was, when I first saw the 8, I went, God, that sounds young, and I tried to remember back because my youngest daughter is 13 now. And but small game in particular, 8, that's a great time for squirrels and rabbit hunting. And and if they can take on that, it's up to the parent. I really think it's how mature the kid is and stuff. But that's they really can do it, and they want to get out there. And it's 2 more years of getting that opportunity, and they'll go through hunter safety if they get hooked. And but I think it's important. I support it. I do think we want to offer that. Doesn't mean every kid and every parent is going to be ready to go at that age. And then on pronghorn, well, 2 things. One, I think it's a great youth hunt because they're a diurnal, daytime active animal. They're just a really good hunt for a kid to be able to sneak up on and have a calm shot where you can kind of take your time. And then on our new Antelope System, as Lance mentioned, I'll just share a quick story. I have a friend who drew an oryx permit standing in line. I think a lot of us have been there, where you're anxious to go into the gate at these oryx hunts, and you're talking to all the people at the trucks around you and stuff, waiting for these gates to open. And a landowner from northeast New Mexico saw my friend had kids and said, "Hey, this new Antelope System, come on up. Come on, take your kids hunting." And those are doe antelope permits, and they're youth only. So it's not like a competition with older hunters or anything, taking anything away. It's just like, there are some new opportunities there with pronghorn that I think it makes sense to take advantage of. So I'm supportive of that. And I guess, Lance, I just love you to tell us how many states are actually with us here in reversing decline in this hunt recruitment, retention, and reactivation.
So, Madam Chair, Commissioner Vespa, at this point, at last count, when we looked at it kind of closely, it looked like there was about 5 or 6 that have really substantially done that. What you really have to take into account is that just because you have one good year, you can't call that a reverse. And so you've got to do it year after year after year. And that's what our track record has shown since 2011. When we took some very proactive steps, including shifting the way we deliver education from a lot of that traditional classroom setting to a very skills-based training, the nuts and bolts, hands-on, how do you hunt, how do you fish? And we turned a lot of attention on fishing as well. And that has really helped us make a shift.
Thank you. And I just had one last thing. My daughter still tells me all the time how much she enjoyed the hunter safety class she took here in New Mexico. And, that was years ago now. And she still brings it up that she just loved going through hunter safety. And this mentor program, I think, is just an opportunity to give those kids a chance and get hooked before that commitment of going through hunter safety. And the data is there around safety, and as long as it's a mentored hunt. So, yeah, I appreciate that we got this at our department, this dedication. We're at the top of the list for the nation in terms of our success in this area. And I support these 2 proposed changes. I think it's a good idea.
Commissioner Bates, thank you, Commissioner Vespa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd echo probably pretty much everything that Commissioner Vesbach had just said. I know that we utilized the mentor program with my daughter. When she was 12, she had never wanted to hunt. But one day she woke up and said, well, when are you taking me hunting? And we had an opportunity to get a cow tag. Had we had to wait to get through hunter's safety, we would have missed that opportunity. So she went out, had a wonderful time, and told me now she only wants to shoot bull elk, which is more challenging for us. And then my son, on the other hand, he's been hunting with me since he was small. And at 8 years old, he harvested deer, no problem. He was using a 243, I believe, at the time. Now he's 13 and shoots a 270 short mag. But I think I'm very supportive of both. I think antelope is an absolutely a great hunt for youth as well. So I'd be supportive of both these measures.
Thank you, Commissioner Bates, Commissioner Vesbach, and Vice Chair Salazar Henry. I'm going to just add my comment, and then I think we need to wrap up this particular agenda item. I do want to say that on a personal level, we have 3 children, and our sons went through hunter safety. I can't recall if our daughter went through hunter safety, but she certainly has been an avid sportsman along with her brother. I am very supportive of what you do, Lance. I think the idea of expanding to antelope, we've had personal experiences when the kids were young. Unfortunately, at the time, we didn't have the opportunity to go into that program, but certainly the kids, the boys did the hunter safety. I like the idea of the antelope expanding, that the pronghorn, the elk, or the deer. It's great. So personally, I think it's very good. I do like what Vice Chair Salazar Henry said in terms of the data. I, for one, think it's very important that when we are using our dollars within the Department of Game and Fish, and if you have wonderful data, a wealth of data, look at that and consider what kind of changes and opportunities you can do to expand. I like the idea of benchmarking, the questions about the other states. That's all very good. Okay, before we move in, I'm sorry, Commissioner Bates, Kramer, did you have something to add?
Just one thing that I think we've overlooked on the antelope is on the leftover license sale yesterday, there was a lot of leftover antelope tags. So I don't, that kind of supports the idea.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so that was a discussion item. But before we move on to the next agenda item, I think we need to make a clarification on agenda item number 4. There were 3 parts, A, B, and C. We briefly discussed A and B, but we did not discuss the item 4C, Game Commission meeting spreadsheet. That was a discussion item, and I'm going to kind of refer back to Vice Chair. A consent agenda, it's my understanding that we can just proceed with a motion, and I thought the motion included all 3 items. Do you all feel that we needed to address or make it very specific to item number 4C? No?
I don't as well. I mean, it's on the consent agenda, and any of those items on the consent can be pulled up and asked to be for discussion. So the spreadsheet, unless somebody had some questions, there was an opportunity to say we needed to discuss that. So I believe we've addressed that particular agenda.
Thank you, Vice Chair, for that clarification and that comment. I'd also like to note that we have wonderful participation from the public on this Zoom meeting. this live stream that is being recorded. And I can't say thank you enough. I've been watching some of the dialogue here on the chat. I want to acknowledge all of you and let you know that we do have a section on general public. I know that it's my discretion where we can have you raise a hand and call you in and unmute you during that time. But for the sake of some items that I believe are time sensitive on our agenda, I would prefer that we bring in those of you who are raising your hands in the chat. Please come forward in the agenda item where we have public comment rather than the particular discussion item. So thank you for doing that. Let's move on to the next agenda item.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Vice Chair.
So we have no public comment on agenda item 8?
No, I think we have public comment on agenda item number 12.
Okay, well, I may be confused. I thought every one of our agenda items, we opened it up for public comment if there was any.
Oh, that's not the way I read the agenda. Are you suggesting that you would like to hear from the comment, the public during the agenda items of discussion?
Well, Madam Chair, I guess in a regular setting, every agenda item we ask for public comment. If there was a comment card, they would fill one out. Whether agenda item 8 is not an item where we're going to take action.
Understood.
But we've always opened it up for public comment if there was any on all items. So I guess I didn't see the distinction between. If there's no public comment, that's fine, but we've always opened it up after commission discussion to public comment.
Okay, so.
I'm Chair, Vice Chair Salazar Henry is correct. In general, we have, our past practice has been, doesn't mean it needs to be our future practice, but our past practice has been to ask for public comment after each agenda item. But obviously it's at your discretion.
Okay, well, I've been keeping an eye on the clock. And again, as I stated earlier, I'm trying to be very mindful of some of those time-sensitive agenda items, particularly the executive session. Lance Cherry, you are doing a phenomenal job monitoring the live stream of this meeting. And I know you have been involved in some of the chats. Can you please call, I believe it is Dave? Is Dave still here?
Chair, I'm looking, I do not see him still in the attendees list at this moment.
Okay.
And we have nobody with a hand raised. So I think that no one has a comment right now.
Okay, and actually his chat said he didn't feel like he had to make a public comment, if I recall. But,
right.
Okay, very good. So then let's move on to the next agenda item. Thank you for your patience, everyone. And let's move to Kirk Patton. Thank you. Update on the department's native fish program.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Commissioners, can you see my presentation okay and hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity today to provide an update on the native fish program. Before I get into the actual presentation, I wanted to point out that a lot of the conservation efforts I'm going to talk about today are the collective work of almost our entire division. Some of them are so massive that we simply can't get them done with our native fish program staff. So it's really a divisional update on some of these activities. The other thing I wanted to point out is we generate a lot of data in our routine monitoring of various fish populations and aquatic invertebrate populations. And I didn't include that. I wanted to give you guys the the on the ground conservation efforts that are intended to increase the distribution of native species or halt the decline or that sort of thing. So again, these are some of the bigger projects we've been working on, and if there's others that you're interested, I'm more than willing to provide updates on those. So in any of the on the ground actions that we're involved in, they're usually guided by some sort of management plan or some sort of recovery plan. In 2016, the previous commission adopted a statewide fisheries management plan, which we use as kind of a springboard for all things aquatic related for the department. We're currently working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service and non-governmental organizations on revising a recovery plan for Gila trout. Other examples of the plans that we're working with are a Rio Grande cutthroat trout conservation strategy, which was adopted back in 2013 that we've been implementing for a while now. Another example would be a recently adopted conservation agreement for Rio Grande chub and Rio Grande sucker. And then finally, we have some really old recovery plans in the case of Chihuahua chub, which we're still relying upon as dating back to 1990. So again, all of these actions are kind of related to or somehow to a management plan or recovery plan. This is just a statewide perspective of the projects that I'm going to update you on today. This is by no means comprehensive, but nonetheless, just to kind of put it in perspective on if you're not familiar with all these areas. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, the northwest part of the state, I'm going to give you an update on San Juan recovery efforts for Colorado pike minnow and razorback sucker. Then moving up to, I don't know if you can see my cursor, moving up to near the Colorado line in the central part of the state, Rio Costilla project, where we're trying to restore Rio Grande cutthroat trout and other members of the native fish community, the Rio Grande chub below that, and then Rio Grande sucker. I'm going to give you an update on some Rio Grande cutthroat trout efforts in the Banda or in the Rio Frijoles, as well as the Rio Las Animas down in the southern part of the state. Down in the southeastern part of the state, we're working on conserving Pecos pupfish, as well as way down near Carlsbad, Texas hornshell and the host fish upon which that native mussel rely upon for its reproductive life cycle. And then finally, update on Chihuahua chub conservation efforts, and as Director Sloan alluded to earlier, have some good news about the Whitewater Gila trout restoration project. So beginning, I think 25 years ago or so, when there was a federal program started and the Fish and Wildlife Service administers it. It's called the San Juan River Basin Recovery Implementation Program. And it's focused on recovering two native fish to the San Juan Basin, that being Colorado pike minnow and razorback sucker. And our biologists and program managers have been involved for a long time in that project, primarily involved in a biology committee, which essentially helps decide on and drive a lot of the science in the recovery efforts. But we've also headed up the small body monitoring program, which is intended to document not only reproduction, but recruitment of early life stages of pike minnow and razorback sucker. And so that upper graph is catch rates of Colorado pike minnow that are stocked by the Fish and Wildlife Service into the San Juan every year. And for a long time, we've documented their survival and growth into larger size classes of Colorado pike minnow. The bottom graph indicates that we could not document the life stage between larval fish and an age 1 fish, or a slightly larger size, so that young of year category, until about 2016, when we started to pick up some age 0 Colorado pike minnow. So that's good news for this program. Over the past 5 years, I think we've documented, or 4 years, we've documented recruitment of age 0s Colorado pike minnow. That picture of the lower picture of that fish, that's also an age 0 razorback sucker that's also started to recruit in that river. So this is good news for the recovery program. The downside of this is that the federal funding is set to expire in 2023. So we're working with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Interstate Stream Commission and other partners to try and identify alternative funding moving into the future. So now I'm going to shift down into the southeast part of the state and talk about some recovery efforts for Texas hornshell. Texas hornshell is a native, it's the last native mussel that exists in New Mexico. It's native to the Pecos River drainage and parts of the lower Rio Grande drainage. It was listed as endangered 2 or 3 years ago under the Federal Endangered Species Act. And the department has been involved in just basic life history sort of research for over a decade, maybe 15 years now. And that includes how long the mussels live, how quickly they grow, what preferred habitat they have. And all native mussels have a unique life history where they need some sort of fish in order to infest with an early life stage of the mussel. And that picture down there is a river carp sucker, which we were surveying, and it was infested with the native, or with Texas hornshell glaucidia. And so we had to do a whole series of research projects just finding out what fish were used by the mussel for the reproductive ecology. So with Texas hornshell, they're only found in the Black River in New Mexico. And at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that we're working to improve the status of species in the state, not just monitor their status. And one of the places that our biologists thought was a good idea to try restoration of Texas hornshell and the host fish upon which they rely was in the Delaware River. And that's just to the south of the Black River drainage, right on the state line with Texas. And so in that case, we actually physically moved mussels from the Black River over to the Delaware River, starting, I think it was in 2015 or 2016. We also moved gray red horse, which are a native sucker that is an important host fish for Texas hornshell. And both of those efforts were initially successful. We had gray red horse reproduction. The Texas hornshell survived. But then one of our biologists came up with a unique idea of, rather than actually taking mussels from the source habitats, can we infest host fish artificially in 5-gallon buckets and then move the fish over? And that's kind of in its early stages there, but it's kind of a novel technique for restoring mussels here in New Mexico. So all indications are that the restoration effort was going well. Unfortunately, we've had some really dry conditions this year, and the Delaware River seems to be at almost no flow, and the isolated pools are in the process of drying up. So that's a setback for this restoration effort. We'll see what happens with the rains and precipitation throughout the rest of the season. So staying down in the southeast part of the state, for a long time, the department has been engaged in Pecos pupfish conservation efforts. Pecos pupfish are an endemic species. They like really salty water. Found in the lower Pecos River and pothole areas down near Roswell. Part of the reason for their decline was the introduction of sheep's head minnow years ago. They will hybridize with Pecos pupfish, and for the most part, Pecos pupfish are now only found in the Roswell area, and including some of the core habitats over, if you can see my cursor, this overland BLM overflow area, Bottomless Lake State Park, and Bitter Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. Years ago, the partners put in some small fish barriers that weren't really working anymore, which were intended to keep sheep's head minnow from inhabiting those core habitats. And last summer, our biologists worked with engineers and the Bureau of Land Management and a construction company to actually replace those barriers. And now we're looking at about 30% of the core remaining habitat is secured from invasion of sheep's head minnow. Pecos pupfish are up for a formal review by the Fish and Wildlife Service for listing under the Endangered Species Act, and we're hoping this effort and some of our other efforts are going to help address the status of that species moving forward. So now I'm going to move over into the southwest part of the state, in particular, talk about the Members River drainage and Chihuahua Chub conservation efforts. Chihuahua Chub, again, are a threatened species under the Federal Endangered Species Act. They're only found in the Members drainage and small parts of the Members drainage, and as well as northern Mexico, and we're kind of uncertain about the status in Mexico. In 2013, the Silver Fire burned large portions of the Members watershed, and we almost lost Chihuahua Chub due to ash flows and debris flows after that fire. It also was opportunistic because it removed non-native trout in that river, which were a primary competitor and probably a predator of Chihuahua Chub. So we seized upon the opportunity at that time to see if we could improve Chihuahua chub habitat with some of our traditional stream restoration techniques, kind of like that. In that center picture there is just a couple of enhanced pools, and we enhanced the sinuosity or the meandering of the stream, and did a bunch of riparian plantings to try and make it more Chihuahua chub friendly, I guess. And the graph in the bottom left side of that slide indicates the pre and post construction catch rates of Chihuahua chub. And in those reaches, we did it actually on the members' property, which is owned by the State Game Commission. It was purchased specifically for Chihuahua chub conservation efforts. And we also worked on the Nature Conservancy property down there. In both of those reaches, we've seen about a double to triple of the catch rate of Chihuahua chub, and also a commensurate increase in Rio Grande sucker catch rates. One of the things that came out of this study and the improvement of the fish community in that river is that we started to see some long movement patterns of Chihuahua chub that we never anticipated, including moving through habitats which I would be surprised any fish moves through there, let alone Chihuahua chub. So we're going to engage hopefully this year or next year in a study trying to better understand the movement patterns of Chihuahua chub. Another thing that this brought to light is that we needed some sort of refuge habitat. Should another catastrophic event happen in the future, we could have a place where kind of a backup plan for Chihuahua chub. And so for the past few years, we have been working with the same engineer who designed our fish habitat work to create a refuge pond somewhere for Chihuahua chub. And the place we've selected is the River Ranch, which was purchased by the State Game Commission several years ago. We have water rights for the property, which could be put towards use of this. It's basically a naturalized pond that we have some control over water levels. We can drain it if we need to, if something were introduced that we don't want in there. We've worked with the holder of the conservation easement for the property, and they are in support of constructing this. We just need to find the non-federal match for construction of the project. So we're excited about this, and hopefully we'll get this implemented in the next couple of years. So, now I'm going to move into some of our native trout restoration efforts. Rio Grande cutthroat trout have been subject to a couple of different lawsuits about whether they should or should not be listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. We're doing a significant amount of conservation work to try and address the declines of Rio Grande cutthroat trout. We're also incorporated again Rio Grande sucker and Rio Grande chub into some of those restoration efforts. One of the primary projects that we've been working on since 2007 is the Rio Costilla project, where it's on Bermejo Park Ranch and Carson National Forest. We're in kind of the final phases of that project. We had a couple of years of delays for a couple of reasons for that final phase. But so far, we've increased the distribution of Rio Grande cuts by about 90 miles, 15 high mountain lakes, and Costilla Reservoir. Again, we're set to implement the final phases of that this fall. We're running into some challenges with the COVID-19 situation, but I think we're working through those. Another exciting part of that project is the private landowner has installed small temporary fish barriers along the way to help us stage the project. And they are, because of some of them are kind of falling apart, but also because we want to open up some of that upper watershed for natural fish movement. They started to remove a couple of those smaller barriers. As I mentioned, the silver fire hit the members drainage in 2013. It also burned large portions of the Los Animas drainage near Caballo Reservoir on the Ladder Ranch and also Gila National Forest. And so after the ash flows removed the non-native fish, non-native trout from that area, we stocked over the past 2 or 3 years from a population in northern New Mexico. And just earlier this summer, I think it was in late May or early June, as part of our efforts during this COVID-19 time, we documented reproduction of that population. So that's a new population for Rio Grande cutthroat trout. It's also the farthest south distribution of Rio Grande cutthroat trout in existence now. So that's exciting to have another opportunity both for Rio Grande cut conservation, but also for angling opportunities for that native fish down there. Similar to the Los Animas drainage, the Las Conchas fire, which burned large portions of the Jemez Mountains back in 2011. It also removed the brook trout population from the Rio Frijoles on Bandelier National Monument. We stocked that with Rio Grande cuts the past couple of years, and also documented evidence of reproduction in that stream last fall. In total, I think we lost 2 or 3 Rio Grande cutthroat trout populations from the Las Conchas fire, but in the long run, because of the way it burned and the ash flows that came through, we're looking at gaining, I think, 7 or 8 streams and a total of 30 miles of habitat for Rio Grande cuts. So just as a heads up, we are continuing to plan to increase distribution of Rio Grande cutthroat trout in the Pecos Watershed. We have 2 small projects lined up. One may be implemented later this fall if some paperwork gets lined up. That would be in the Willow Creek drainage. The terminus of that project is actually on the Jamie Cook Wildlife Management area, and the other one is in the Cow Creek drainage. And we'll hopefully be planning for some larger restoration projects over the next few years. So in total, since 2006, we've increased the distribution of Rio Grande cutthroat trout by just under 21%, which is and that's in New Mexico. And so I think that's a good trend for Rio Grande cutthroat trout in New Mexico, and hopefully we can continue that in the future. So as I mentioned before, we're incorporating a couple other native species into our Rio Grande cutthroat trout conservation activities. And both of those are Rio Grande chub and Rio Grande sucker. Both of these species have been petitioned for listing under the Endangered Species Act. We're awaiting a 12-month formal review by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They've been on our radar for some time, and we developed a formal conservation team, formal conservation agreement in place to help guide some of our conservation activities. And we're in the process of developing strategies for both of these species. And that map on the left side of the slide is some of the initial efforts of getting all the information we have from a variety of different biologists in New Mexico and Texas and Colorado and even a small portion of Arizona to better understand what is the status of the species and where are the areas that we need to do the most work. So another element of that is I just approved a PO for next year for us to use to work with the University of New Mexico to do some genetic studies to better understand the genetic structure of the remaining populations out there, which will guide our restoration efforts. And so the last topic I want to cover is some positive news about Gila trout restoration in the Whitewater Creek drainage. For those of you who are not familiar with that watershed, Gila trout, Whitewater Creek was part of the burn scar, within the burn scar of the 2012 Whitewater Baldy Fire, which was the largest wildfire in the history of New Mexico. At that time, there were a few small pockets of non-native trout which persisted in the watershed. And so we worked with U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Catron County, some non-governmental organizations like Trout Unlimited, to plan a restoration project with the use of rotenone to get those few pockets of non-native trout out of the Whitewater Creek with hopes of it being inhabited by Gila trout. Since 2017, we've had crews in there for a couple weeks at a time in a really remote, rugged canyon that had just been severely burned, applying rotenone to get rid of those last few non-native trout. So this is just a slide to summarize. This isn't the work needed to remove the fish. This is just the work to get to the locations for our staff and our partners to do the work. And our biologists and the contract packers who helped pack us into these areas cleared over 120 miles of trail, of dozens, if not hundreds of trees that would fall anytime there was a rainstorm or if there was a windstorm. We had anywhere from 33 to 42 personnel, either in the woods or playing support outside of the woods or in the office processing last minute POs or working with helicopter companies to make sure the helicopter's there on time. We had something over 300 mules packed on it over the 3 years. Anywhere from 10 to 35 mules in operation supporting our crews on any given day. Because our crews had to walk through some of the areas, there were no trails left after the fire. We actually had to have helicopters pick up and sling their food and their food for the night, or their sleeping bags, or their tents, or the equipment they needed for the next day down below them in the canyon. And then over 200 environmental DNA samples spaced evenly throughout the watershed to help us document whether non-native trout were still present in some of those areas. And as Director Sloan said earlier, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, we received word from our geneticist that indicated they could not, or all of the samples that we collected this year were negative for any non-native trout presence. So we're making plans as we speak to start stocking this watershed starting in August, and will continue for about 3 years. And that this will increase the distribution of Gila trout by about 28 miles. And to put this in context, back in the 1950s, Gila trout were basically, I think, 4 streams, maybe 5 streams, with maybe 15 miles of habitat compared to several hundred miles of historic habitat. Through recovery efforts in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, we got to a point where Gila trout were downlisted from endangered status to threatened status. In 2012, the Whitewater Baldy fire hit and basically knocked us back to 1990s levels of populations and stream mileage. And through a massive amount of work of inventorying streams, restocking in streams, utilizing the opportunities presented by fires of removing streams, removing fish from some streams, we're back to just about where we were in 2012. And so with the stocking efforts in Whitewater Creek over the next 2 to 3 years, will be, the best status of Gila trout is in probably the last century. And we have plans on keeping that bar increasing over the next several years. So our strategic plan talks about the desire to, or the objective of increasing angler opportunities for native trout. And in the case of Rio Grande cutthroat trout, it's an easier situation because their historic and current distribution are wider. But in the case of Gila trout, I just wanted to provide some trends we're observing in our angler data. In this case, the upper left-hand graph is from an annual angler survey that we do to evaluate angler preference of species, what sort of tackle they use, angler satisfaction, and that sort of thing. And each year we ask what sort of species that people prefer. And so over the past 5 or 6 years, we've seen almost a doubling of healing trout angling preference by anglers. Alternatively, down in the bottom right-hand corner of that slide is we do an annual survey of anglers who obtain a Gila trout permit in order to legally fish for Gila trout. And for the positive respondents of that survey, we're seeing a marked increase in the number of anglers who are going and seeking Gila trout. I think this is important for a few reasons. One is I think we're advancing, or we're being successful in our strategic plan approach. We're also reaching out to a new set of anglers who are, a niche of people who want to fish for native trout in these remote areas. And also, I think it's a way that we're being proactive in ensuring to monitor what sort of angling is going on for, still it's a threatened species under the New Mexico Wildlife Conservation Act and also the Federal Endangered Species Act. So we want to continue to be mindful and not overfish these populations. So that's all I had for today. I wanted to end my presentation on a picture that Lance Cherry shared with me a while back of an angler who caught this Rio Grande cutthroat trout in one of our restoration areas. I think it's a beautiful fish. It's our New Mexico state fish, but it's also a good example of how native trout restoration, native fish restoration can also mesh well, in my opinion, with angling. So that's all I have. Thank you for your time, and I will stand for any questions.
Chief Kirkpatrick, that is wonderful, and that is a beautiful trout. Yes. Commissioners, any questions? Actually, I'd like to jump in and acknowledge we have one of our commissioners that's able to join us, Commissioner David Souls. He's out in the wilderness on a hike. Can you hear us?
Yes, Madam Chair, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, nice to hear you. How's it going?
It's going great. I guess the first thing I should do is apologize to everyone else. I know you have these beautiful backgrounds in your Zoom meeting, and I get to be in that background and still able to participate. So I'd like to thank Lance Cherry and how he's conducting these meetings. I think it's remarkable that I'm able to actually be online.
Wow. And I'm sure your elevation is what, 11,000 or what?
Yeah, I think we're at about 11.5 right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a little solar charger and not that much battery left in my phone. So if I disappear, that may be part of the issue. If I could, I'd like to make a comment or two and then maybe ask a question for Chief Patton.
Please do.
Okay. So first, you know, I remember literally back in the 70s when people were talking about restoring Gila trout and how they could go about doing that. And here we are several decades later and you know, through a natural fire, had a little setback, but I'm really impressed and want to commend the department on how well that has gone so that the fish has been delisted and people can actually fish for it. And that we now have a plan, I think I heard, for maybe another 18 miles. But on top of that, not only are fishermen interested and obviously would like to be able to fish for native species, but there are a lot of folks interested in the non-native species as well. And I think it's a wonderful thing that we're able to support all of those at the same time. Chief Patton, one of the things I'm curious about, you talked about getting some Rio Grandes restored in the Animas drainage. And of course, the Animas runs up, I think its headwaters are near the Continental Divide. Were there also Gila trout in the Animas at one time, or has it naturally been limited to Rio Grande cutthroats?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Souls, that drainage is 100% in the Rio Grande drainage. So we consider that only Rio Grande cutthroat trout historic habitat. It is also historic habitat for Rio Grande sucker and chub, and they are both present in that drainage as well. So no, there were not Gila trout in that drainage historically. Okay,
and I assume that to be the case. Which means, does that same thing pertain as long as you're on the east side of the Continental Divide? Native fish would be Rio Grandes, and throughout the Alto Leopold and Gila, that everything on the west side of the Continental Divide would be Gila trout?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Souls, from a trout perspective, yes. From a native species perspective, it's a little trickier. I could go into detail if you would like on that, but there are some species that are found in the Rio Grande drainage that new evidence indicates they are native to the Members drainage and small parts of the Gila drainage.
Wow. Okay. No, you don't need to go into great detail now, but that's fascinating to me. Very interesting. And I know in a previous meeting, you talked a little bit about Rio Grande restoration over in the Lincoln, and maybe you commented on that and I just didn't catch it, but can you give us just a brief update if you didn't on Rio Grandes, I think in Bonita Creek or something like that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Souls, yes, I can. Earlier in the meeting, Director Sloan mentioned the YY brook trout project that we were engaged in. I did not include that in my presentation. but that pertains to the Rio Bonito project that you're talking about. Briefly, the YY Brook Trout project is an innovative means, and that it's still in the early investigation stage, but it's a means by which you can create a brood stock of fish, or in this case, brook trout, and they are all male brook trout, and they have 2 Y chromosomes. And the idea behind that is, if you stock them into an area, say a population of brook trout that you don't want in an area, you will skew the sex ratio over time towards all males. And at that point, there's no reproduction and the population theoretically crashes. There are 4 streams in New Mexico that we have tested this, and we're working with researchers at New Mexico State University and also researchers up with Idaho Fish and Game, who came up with this idea. We're doing that in 3 streams where we're doing a formal investigation with a whole bunch of data generated from it. The Rio Bonito is another area because of, I don't remember the name of that fire, but removed a significant amount of the brook trout from that area. And so we have YY brook trout in there, and we are in the process of evaluating that. There's also a small off-channel pond, which is a part of that as well. So what we do know so far is that YY brook trout are surviving much better than we had anticipated. We were hoping for about 10% survival for the first year. They might be up in the 20 to 30% range. And we also know that they are at least reproductively active. And so we should start to get some genetic data back later this fall about whether or not we are seeing the population skew towards all male. So that's an exciting project because it's an alternative means for native trout conservation, which we currently don't have. And so the more tools we have in our tool set for that sort of activity, I think the better off we are.
Thank you, Chief Patton. Any other commissioners want to say a few words or questions or comments?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Vespa.
Yeah, first I just wanted to I guess make a statement that I think this really highlights how much the department does now and good work it does for non-game species. And it's been a long-term 40-year effort to try to broaden the base of funding for the Department of Game and Fish. And I think I just want to highlight a statement of Kirk's, Director Patton's, that we have a refugia planned for the Chihuahua chub that is going to protect the species from going extinct on the earth, and we're just looking for the non-federal match. And I think that really highlights how big of a need we have for that expanded funding base over time. And just also just wanted to highlight the amount of work the good work the department is doing on behalf of non-game. And so a follow-up question on that with Chief, with climate change, historic fire suppression, we're seeing these largest wildfires we've ever seen. Do we have needs for other refugia for species? I mean, that was, I think pretty telling that we almost lost one over a fire.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vesbach, yes, that would be the simple answer. The department has a hatchery dedicated to Rio Grande cutthroat trout conservation. That's our Seven Springs hatchery. We are getting ready to convert Glenwood hatchery once it's renovated over to Gila trout rearing. Currently, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a facility dedicated to Gila trout predominantly, and that's more a national fish hatchery. There are other, there's a national fish hatchery down in Dexter, New Mexico, that raises various threatened and endangered species. The challenge with a lot of the hatchery setting is you're talking about domestication issues. And so refuge populations there is a need. So yes, I think there is a need for refuges or refuge populations for lots of native species. And I might add that there's other examples of refuge populations that our department deals with and or within my division, and that's something like Socorro isopod refuges. There's a small refuge in Socorro that we have helped maintain for decades now for a small endemic invertebrate. So that's another example.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vesbach, I guess I would also point out that one of the best ways, I think, to address these fires and the long-term issues and consequences of them is through our habitat management programs, through improving habitat such that the fires that do occur are more natural, lighter across the landscape, and not as catastrophic as they have been. I think that would reduce the need for refuges and increase the overall populations of wildlife across our landscapes. And that's certainly something the agency is very engaged in.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes good sense. And then for the specific refuge with the River Ranch, when are we projecting to begin construction on that and allocate funding?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vesbach, if we have the federal funds right now. I think depending upon how a couple other projects go and their costs, we could consider building it probably in FY21, maybe FY22, just again, depending upon the cost of some other projects.
Okay, thank you. And then moving on, I have some specific questions about the Whitewater Creek restoration. Could you just fill us in on, the Mora hatchery, I believe it's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service operated hatcheries had some problems with their Gila trout, and then there's also some controversy around the different strains and preserving the strains of Gila trout in this like metapopulation concept. Could you just explain to us what's going on there, the controversy, and then how you're dealing with that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vesbach, I think the challenge that we're dealing with, and this is, and I agree completely with Director Sloan, of, if we can address habitat issues out there, refuges become less of a need. The challenge with rearing fish in the hatchery in a domestic setting is we want them to be as wild as possible. And when you take a wild fish and put it in a domestic hatchery, it's difficult to rear them. And so, they want to eat bugs and, that sort of thing, other fish versus, being fed trout pellets and that sort of thing. So I think, the challenge is bringing fish into the wild, from the wild, rearing them, maintaining genetic diversity, not domesticating them. And so I think the Fish and Wildlife Service has adopted a genetic management plan through the years that is intended to maintain genetic diversity. What the challenges associated with that is it also at times it can limit your ability of what crosses to make or how you go about the timing of an individual fish that you need to make a cross with. It's just a complex process, and sometimes more complexity does not necessarily make things better. So I think that's one challenge that we're dealing with. And, after a long duration of rearing Gila trout, the numbers that are available this year may not be exactly what we were hoping for the Whitewater Creek drainage. I'm confident we will get the watershed stock. I'm confident it will be in the thousands of fish, but it's not ideally the numbers that we were hoping for the lineages of Gila trout that are going to be stocked to that area.
Okay, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the other part of that question is what lineages and how you go about stocking them, and there's different schools of thought about how you can go about doing that, and so I think right now we're working through with the service about how to take the different lineages from the hatchery and where to put them to, in our opinion, create the greatest likelihood of a robust, genetically diverse population of Gila trout, not necessarily subpopulations of different lineages. A lot of that, I could get you a copy of the draft recovery plan for Gila trout, because there has been some changes in how we view the lineages and mixing and which areas we use a particular lineage.
Okay, thank you. And that's the term I was looking for, lineages. Is there a specific lineage we're having trouble maintaining in terms of Whitewater Creek?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vestbach, there's 5 lineages. One is Main Diamond, South Diamond, Spruce Creek, Whiskey Creek, and Iron Creek. And I believe the most problematic historically has been Spruce Creek. And then Iron Creek we have in very low numbers. Unfortunately, I believe Main Diamond Creek is not also, or is in pretty low availability this year. So 3 of the 5, I think we will have less than we had desired, but nonetheless, we're still going to have in the thousands of fish to put in this year.
Okay, and then which lineage are we introducing into Whitewater Creek?
Under the new recovery plan, we are going to introduce all 5, and this is considered a mixed lineage population.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you walking me through that.
Commissioner Vestbach, I guess I'd like to just chime in and say that Kirk said all of that very succinctly, but Kirk has spent hours, days, weeks in meetings trying to iron out how we're dealing with these lineages, where they're going to go. And I think his impact on that genetic analysis and how we use those lineages has been really significant, and will move the project forward in a meaningful way. So I'd like to acknowledge that effort.
Thank you. And then I guess one more follow-up that I thought about, are we really worried right now about any of these lineages? I mean, we've had a bunch of obviously terrific progress overall over the years. And I agree with you on the angler aspect of it. I mean, I just see Gila trout more and more in national fishing magazines. But regardless, are you worried we may lose some of the genetic diversity from these lineages? Is it something we should be aware of that's a challenge?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vestbach, yes, I think we should be concerned about it. Early on in my career, one of my biologist colleagues, he talked about Aldo Leopold and how Aldo Leopold said that the first step in intelligent tinkering is to keep all the pieces. And so I think we've done this with Rio Grande cutthroat trout. We've done it with Gila trout. We're trying to keep all the original pieces that we had remaining, and that being the 5 lineages. And so the new plan is set up to try and replicate individual lineages into certain streams, but also create those mixed lineages, which has as much of the remnant diversity of Gila trout as we have left. And so I think the collective wisdom of the Gila trout recovery team is that's a good approach, and it's a different approach slightly different approach than in the past. So I think there is a risk of losing some of that. I think we are mindful of it, and I think it's something we should continue to discuss just to make sure we don't lose sight of it.
Thank you. And then just last question here, we have a fisheries management plan that you gave us the broad overview at a previous meeting. That's from 2016, spring of 2016. I think I recall you saying it's a 5-year plan, which would, intended to be a 5-year look, which would mean an update in spring of next year. Are there plans to update that statewide fisheries management plan? Do you think that's something we should be looking at?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vestbach, the original plan did not have a timeline on it as when it would be effective.
Okay.
We intentionally kind of left it open at that time because it was the first one we had in decades. I think there are certain things that have changed on the landscape. Whether it's individual waters, they're too warm anymore or something like that, or criteria that we originally developed don't necessarily make sense, or I just had a meeting with some of my division yesterday, talking about the need to potentially adopt new objectives for a specific water, because the management that we're trying there is not possible anymore. So I think there are probably enough items on the list that we could consider revising it or updating it. I wouldn't want to do a wholesale, replacement of it. But I think there are a few things that we could update that would be beneficial, and I would leave that to Director Sloan's direction and the commission's discretion of whether that's useful or not. But I think there are things that we could change.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I'd love to hear from Director Sloan on that. My personal opinion is it would be valuable to update that plan, and particularly with some of the stocking strategies and things with not just our native fish but our wild fish. So, yeah, Director Sloan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on updating that plan.
So, Madam Chair, Commissioner, in general, given the amount of time and energy that the projects, largely Costilla, for example, Whitewater, take, then I think 5 years might be too quickly, too short a period to see meaningful change that needs to be addressed in the plan. I agree with Kirk that there are elements of the plan, as he said, the management goals were always intended to be something we would be looking at regularly and say we're either meeting it or we're not, and if we're not, then what are we doing? It doesn't make sense if you have this goal that you're never going to meet. And so revising some of those certainly makes sense. We continue to ask in our angler surveys people's preferences for catching native fish, for catching and releasing, for catching stocked versus wild fish. And so that type of information helps us talk about whether we should be changing stocking strategies. I haven't looked at that information a couple of years, but the last time I did, it was kind of a 50-50 split, which to me indicates maybe we're on a pretty good path in terms of stocking. But it's certainly something that we're always evaluating. And so in general, I guess what I'm trying to say is to mirror Kirk's comments. Certainly there are things in it that need tweaking. But again, a wholesale change is probably a bit premature.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, yeah, I would certainly like to see that update, and totally agree that a wholesale change is not warranted. I glanced back through it before this meeting, and I think a lot is just really relevant still, but that targeted updates I would be very supportive of. So thank you, Director and Chief Patton. It's amazing work going on. Really appreciate answering all my questions.
Madam Chair?
Thank you. Yes, Vice Chair.
I just have several questions for Kirk Patton that I think he'll be able to answer rather quickly. And so, Chief Patton, can you tell me what the target goal is for New Mexico for Rio Grande cutthroat trout restoration? I know you said we're at almost 21% right now, which is great. What is the overall number, or is it measured in reestablishing populations in streams?
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair Salazar Henry, the goals for the department, the long-term goals have not been set. The goals currently are set in the Rio Grande cutthroat trout conservation strategy, which we've adopted with Fish and Wildlife Service and Forest Service and Colorado. And it's set up by geographic management units say for the Caballo GMU, we met it. We've got a population in Los Animas now. I think we are just about there. I want to say it was an increase in maybe 7 or 8 populations in the upper Rio Grande GMU. We have work to do. I think we need to increase the GMU or the number of populations in the Pecos by 4 or 5 streams. And then in the Canadian GMU, I think we need 2 or 3 populations. So there's no succinct number I can give you as far as a state goal,
okay,
but we have that set in those plans, and it's by the different the major watersheds.
Okay. The other question I had is relating to the restoration efforts in the Pecos. And specifically, you're talking about Cow Creek, which is heavily used by all those local fishermen from Santa Fe and everybody else that love to go out there. I mean, we went out there as kids with my parents and fished there. And so have you done community involvement work over there to be able to possibly, you know, kill off some streams to reestablish cutthroats in there? I mean, how far off are we really for doing work up in that Pecos?
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair Salazar Henry, yes, we have done public outreach in the Pecos area. We worked with the Forest Service to do initial scoping, and then they did the decision making as far as the National Environmental Policy Act decision making and that sort of thing. We held a public meeting there maybe 2 years ago, and we had some interest from locals in there. The main interest was from anglers who had fished up in that area and that sort of thing. When I say Cow Creek, this is the extreme headwaters of Cow Creek. This is not anywhere near Cow Creek Ranch or the Cow Creek Campground. This is well above that area. So it's good to point out that it's a small fraction of that watershed.
Okay. And as far as the River Ranch, Refuge, so are you able to use HMAV stamp money or regular Habitat stamp money as the match for that?
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair Salazar Henry, yes. Because it is a wildlife management area, it's my understanding, and we have done that for other projects. I believe HMAV provided some of the match for the work on the members' property for Chihuahua Chub a few years ago. It wasn't the whole match, but part of it.
So how much money are you talking about that this whole project is going to run?
I think we're talking, it's somewhere in the $500,000 range. And we have, that's just including construction costs. It's not engineering costs and that sort of thing. So I think we have the federal portion of that.
Okay. Converting the Glenwood hatchery, I know it's never been this huge production facility for trout compared to something like Lisboa or Red River, but you're going to be converting that to Gila trout. Where are the Stucker trout that everybody else loves to have going to be coming from if they're not going to be coming from Glenwood anymore? Who's going to make up that production, or is it already available somewhere else?
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair Salazar Henry, we've designed Glenwood in a way that we think we're going to be able to make up most of the production at Glenwood, and they'll be stocked as catchable Gila trout. So a lot of the areas that Glenwood currently stocks, and I won't say all of them, but most of them that they currently stock will be replaced with Gila trout.
So those Gila trout won't be restricted on catch and release only?
No, the areas that we are planning to stock them, we have agreements in place where we can allow some harvest and we can allow some, not just catch and release angling or not just artificial flower lure angling.
Okay. All right.
And then the other part of that is we've already started to make plans at Lisboa and Los Ojos and Red River in order to make up some of those differences and how we will transfer those down to parts of the state. So if as of right now, I think we'll be able to meet all of our stocking commitments, both with Glenwood converted to Gila trout as well as other hatcheries producing those fish, and we'll have to figure out the logistics of getting them to those areas.
All right. Thank you, Kurt.
Okay, commissioners and Director Michael Sloan, I'd like to move on. Before I do, let me just say again, thank you, Chief Kurt Patton, for this very, very good presentation and the discussion from all of our commissioners. I echo everything that was said. I took a lot of notes and it was just very good. I'd like to take a 5-minute break, and when we return in 5 minutes, I see 11:33, so we'll be signing off at around 11:35. So let's come back at 11:40. But I'd like to note on the agenda, we have 4 items on our agenda. Paul Varela, Chad Nelson, public comment, and an executive session. I also understand Valerie, Assistant Attorney General Valerie Joe, I believe we had an appointment for an executive session that should have begun at 11:30. Can you give us, before we break in a few minutes, what you would like us to do for your appointment? I don't hear you. And maybe you can respond in 5 minutes. Would that be better if you're having technical? Yes. Okay, let's talk in 5 minutes. So it's 11:34. We will resume our session at 11:40. And thank you all. Let's take a break.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you, Lance Cherry. Welcome back, everyone. Commissioners, Department of Game and Fish, Director Michael Sloan. It is now 11:42. We are resuming from our break. And one of the things that I think an administrative matter needs to be taken care of before we proceed to item number 10 is a very brief discussion on timing. Assistant Attorney General Valerie Jo, can you please speak to us about the executive session and the timing?
Yes, I have informed those from the Attorney General's office that we expect.
Can you speak louder, please?
Sure. I have told those at the Attorney General's office that we plan to meet approximately 12:30. So I believe we could continue with commission business until then, and then break at that time if that is acceptable to you, Chair, and Vice Chair, and State Game Commissioners.
Thank you. I think that's fine with me. I think we need to hear from Director Michael Sloan in terms of what was going to be presented by the other two, item 10 and 11. Director, I think you're on mute.
Darn it, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Madam Chair, so item 10, there are a number of slides that likely will depend on the number of questions commissioners have, how long that will take. Item 11 should be fairly quick. I don't know how much public comment there might be, but certainly if we get to that point, the commission could make a motion to adjust the agenda and return to it after executive session.
Very good. Okay. Well, then let's proceed with Chief Paul Varela with agenda item number 10, and Assistant Valerie Jo will shoot for 12:30. But as the director said, we'll see what we have with public comment and the questions from the commissioners on the other two items. Okay. Very good. We turn this over to you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Can you all see my screen and can you hear me?
Yes.
Agenda item number 10 is financial review of 2020. I'll start by reviewing some of the funds the department is responsible for. Then I'll be discussing some license trends and data. And then I will move into the potential approval of our capital outlay request for fiscal year 22 to 26. And that'll be at the end of the presentation, and that will be an action item. So I don't want to waste too much time, so I'll begin. I'm going to begin by discussing the funds of the department. And I'll just go as briefly as possible. The Game Protection Fund is our largest fund. It's our general operating fund. Revenue comes from the sale of hunting licenses and fishing licenses. It is by far our largest fund. The second fund is the Habitat Management Fund. This is for the improvement, maintenance, development, and operation of property for wildlife and habitat restoration. It helps give access to private land for public use and also provides access to public land that is landlocked. It also helps to maintain Game Commission-owned properties. The Habitat Management Fund receives revenue by collecting money from a Habitat Management Access Validation Stamp, which must be purchased with every resident and non-resident hunting and fishing license. The next fund is the Big Game Enhancement Fund. This fund collects funding from auctions that are sold during governor's auction, and it helps raise revenue for preservation, restoration, and management of bighorn sheep, elk, and deer. The next fund is the Big Game Depredation Fund. This fund was established in 2001 by the legislature to help correct property damage that is caused by big game. The next fund is our Trail Safety Fund. This fund collects revenue through off-highway vehicle registration fees, grants, donations. It is used for the enforcement, education, and maintenance of off-highway vehicle trails. The next fund is our Sykes-Acts Fund. This fund collects revenue through a habitat stamp, which is purchased if you are hunting on BLM or Forest Service land. And it is used for the conservation and wildlife management in accordance with the Sykes Act. The next fund is the Share with Wildlife Fund. This is a tax donation, which is a checkbox on your tax income form. This fund is used to provide assistance to species that don't normally receive any revenue from any other source. The next to last fund is the Bond Interest and Retirement Fund. This helps to pay for principal and interest on bonds issued under the Game and Fish Bond Act. We haven't used this since about 2003. The revenue is collected by collecting $1 from the sale of various licenses. And the last fund is the Capital Outlay Fund. This fund is where we store and maintain our capital outlay money, which we will be showing later. We'll be seeking approval. So I'd like to go over a few slides of just discussing how we gain revenue within the department. This first slide shows the Game Protection Fund revenue. It shows the revenue for fiscal years 19, 18, and fiscal year 17. It shows the license sales, federal and other grant revenue, penalties, interest earned, and other revenue. So by far, license sales is our biggest revenue source. It's about 62.5%. In FY19, the largest blue bar, the department collected $24.4 million in revenue from license sales. The increase compared to FY18 and FY17 was due to the commission and the department decision not to refund the game hunting license. This generated about $1.4 million in additional revenue for the department. The next largest revenue source is the federal and other grants. In FY19, the department collected about $13.6 million. And in FY18, as you can see by the red bar there, the department collected about $15.1 million in federal revenue. This is because we had larger projects like the Albuquerque office and the Roswell office, in which we were able to collect federal reimbursement dollars. Penalties are anything that we collect from violations, generally by law enforcement. The interest earned information is from the cash balances from the Game Protection Fund, and the interest earned during that time is very, very small. In FY19, the department only earned about $639,000 in interest from the Game Protection Fund. The fund is swept every night into the state treasury, and it gains minimal amount of interest. And the last category is other revenue. Other revenue is the sale of vehicles and other equipment at auction. Generally, there are some small other amounts that we collect for program income. So the next slide is I'll be describing how we receive our federal apportionments and the amounts. As you can see by the blue bars, our federal apportionment has decreased slightly from 2016-17 to 2019. This is due mostly to the decrease in sales of firearms and ammunition in the last few years. That is the Pittman-Robertson Act, which collects an excise tax for firearms and ammunition. The red bar represents the Dingell-Johnson apportionment. In 2019, we collected about $6.6 million. It has remained pretty steady. In 2016, we collected about $6.1 million. So that has remained steady. The Dingell-Johnson apportionment comes from the excise tax on fishing tackle. So that's rods, lures, boats, motor or fuel for boats. The next slide shows the annual reimbursement to the department from each of from the apportionments from Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson. 2019 and 20, we have not finished collecting our reimbursement. We have collected through the month of April right now, so we still have a couple months to collect our federal reimbursement. We have done a good job in improving our reimbursement process with the department. We are able to reimburse much faster. In 2016, for Pittman-Robertson, we reimbursed about $14.5 million to the department. And in 2018, the biggest, that largest blue bar, the department collected about $21.2 million in federal reimbursement. And this includes all funds, not just the Game Protection Fund. So the next slide shows the license sales for the department. The annual license sales have remained steady throughout the last couple of fiscal years. Hang on. I apologize. My battery is about to die here. Sorry about that. Okay. So as you can see, our hunting sales and fishing sales have remained constant for the last several fiscal years. In 2016, and for the hunting sales were about 107,000 licenses sold. In 2019 and 20, there was about 110,000 hunting licenses sold. Fishing licenses in red have remained constant as well. In 2016, we sold about 203,000 fishing licenses, and in 2019-20, we sold 219,000 licenses. So as you can see, we haven't been impacted too much within New Mexico as far as license sales. The next slide shows our annual license revenue. And as you can see, our license revenue in hunting has continually increased from 2016 to 2019 and 20. 2016, our license revenue for hunting was about $13.5 million. And in 2019-20, we collected about $14.7 million in annual license revenue. Fishing license revenue has remained steady, about 4 million. 4 million in 2016, 17, 4.3 million in 19 and 20. So this next slide shows the annual fishing revenue for resident versus non-resident. As you can see, most of our licenses sold are to residents. In 2016-17, the department sold 82.5 thousand licenses to residents. And in 2019, we sold 85.4 thousand licenses to residents. Non-residents have gone from 12,000 in 2016-17 to 15.1 thousand in 2019-20. So there's a slight increase. This next slide shows the annual hunting licenses. Sorry, skip on there. So the next slide is the annual hunting and fishing, annual fishing revenue, resident versus non-resident. As you can see, this has remained steady as well. In 2016-17, residents brought in about $1.9 million in revenue. And in 2019-20, residents brought in about 2 million. So it's just a slight increase. Non-residents have steadily increased from 2016 to 2019-20. There was $676,000 brought in 2016 and 845.7 thousand brought in 19-20. The next slide shows the annual hunting licenses revenue. As you can see, versus non-resident versus resident. As you can see, non-residents tend to bring in quite a bit more revenue than residents. In 2019-20, non-residents brought in about $6.5 million for elk in 2019-20 compared to residents, which is about 1.8 million. And it is steadily increased for elk in elk for non-residents. In 2017 and 18, there was 6.4 million. And in 2019-20, non-residents brought in about $6.5 million. So as you can see, non-residents are a big part of the revenue source for the department. So this next slide shows the annual hunting licenses sold. So similar to fishing, residents bring in quite a bit more, or we sell quite a bit more licenses to residents compared to non-residents. However, the difference in price is what accounts for the revenue. For elk, we sold about 25.1 thousand licenses to residents in 2019-20, and in 2017 and 18, we sold 25,000. The sale of licenses for elk remains pretty constant. Most of our licenses and hunt codes are oversubscribed for elk. As was mentioned by one of the commissioners earlier, antelope, that might not be the case. I guess there was some available licenses that were not sold. Sorry. And so this last slide shows our revenue by species, and obviously elk are our biggest revenue source for the department, compared to deer and then fishing. As you can see, some of the percentages here, elk are 44.1% of our revenue source. And fishing is about 22.7% of our revenue source, and deer is at 13.3% of revenue. So So if there are any questions, I'll move on. So this next slide shows the year-to-date budget by year-to-date revenue by fund. So what this shows is the estimated revenue for each fund that's budgeted by the department. The total revenue estimate of 43.1 million, that's our budgeted number for FY20. As you can see, the total revenue collected as of 6/23 was 50.9 million. The reason we collect more revenue than is budgeted is because in a lot of our smaller funds, we are not able to budget as much as we would like because of the appropriation process through the legislature. So in some cases, we would like to budget more funding, but we are not able to just due to the financial situation of the state. So yeah, as you can see, some of these smaller funds do receive a lot more revenue than what is budgeted. For example, the Sykes Act received just a little over 1 million compared to 385,000 of what was budgeted.
Paul, I think you might have a different slide up than the one that's on your screen. We have year-to-date budget by fund.
Oh, okay. Hang on. So this is the slide that I was referring to. So I'll say it over. So the total budget is 43.1 million in revenue, and the total revenue collected is 50.9 million. And as I stated earlier, it's because we're not allowed to budget the amount of money that we would like to for some of these smaller funds. And in some cases, we don't have the capacity to spend all the money that we would like in each fiscal year. So I will go to the budget by fund next. I'll go back to the other slide. So this slide here shows our total budget, which is 43.1 million. Year to date, as of 6/23, we spent $36 million. We spent 33.9 million in the Game Protection Fund. We still have about $3.3 million encumbered for the remainder of the year. The majority of that encumbrance is for salaries and benefits. Each pay period, we spend about $850,000 to pay salaries of employees. And our remaining budget is 3.6 million. And also this includes all budget adjustment requests. Budget adjustment requests are a request to the Department of Finance to add additional budget or to move budget around. So the next slide shows the cash balance by fund. This shows a total of what is remaining in all of our funds currently as of the end of April. For each fund, this is the cash balance, and so all the descriptions that I gave earlier, this shows how much money is in each fund and how much is remaining. One thing to point out is as we go through and look at some of the capital projects that we will be approving, it will start to reduce the amount of Game Protection Fund money in that balance of 17.4 million. As a rule of thumb, once we get below 25% of the department's budget, which is about 10 million, the department will have to start looking for ways to increase the Game Protection Fund in order to operate. And that's where a potential license fee increase may come in. So the next part of the presentation is this will be an action item. This is the fiscal year 2022 capital project plan. So this is a requirement by the Department of Finance to be submitted to them by July 1st. When we prepare our capital project plan, we prepare a 5-year plan. However, the capital plan is only approved 1 year at a time. So it's important to remember that what we're approving right now, the most important year is fiscal year 2022. Although we do have plans for future out years, we just don't necessarily need to. Those future years can change. So the capital project plan is separate from the operating budget request. This year, the FY22 capital outlay plan focuses on wildlife habitat restoration and management projects and hatchery improvements. So if approved, capital plan is available for 4 years. We're able to spend the money for 4 years. So I'm going to go through each slide, and each slide will have our plan for each coming fiscal year. And as I said, this fiscal year 22 is our most important year. This is the next fiscal year's plan. We're requesting $3 million in total. That $3 million is to be spent on wildlife habitat restoration and management projects. So these are projects related to prevent catastrophic wildfires, improve watershed health, and enhance wildlife habitat. And the second project is for hatchery improvements. So we would like to update and improve infrastructure at 6 hatcheries, including the visitor center and raceways. So for hatchery improvements, we're going to use some bond interest and retirement funding of $500,000. We're requesting to use $1.5 million in big game enhancement funding and $1 million in habitat management funding. In fiscal year 2023, we have several planned projects. As I stated before, you can see that we are planning on spending $6 million in game protection fund money. 1 million of that would be for wildlife habitat restoration. 1 million for native trout fish barriers, 2.5 million for the dredging of commission-owned lakes. That would either be Fenton Lake or Snow Lake, and 1.5 million for Los Ojos hatchery renovation. So as I stated earlier, if this plan were to move forward in FY23, that $6 million would count against the $17 million that we have in the game protection fund in that current balance. So we would be getting close to that 25% that I mentioned earlier in order to be able to operate. In fiscal year 2023, we're also requesting $1 million of habitat management fund and $1 million of Sykes-Act funding. So the total request would be $8 million in FY23. In fiscal year 24, the total request would be 9.7 million. Again, a big portion of this, 7.7 million, would be out of the game protection fund. 2.5 million would be for Eagle Nest Dam. 1.2 million for to construct a new hatchery building, and 2.25 acre ponds at Rock Lake Hatchery. $4 million for a new office complex, either in the northeast or southwest area. And the last project would be for infrastructure and maintenance, which is $500,000 requested from the bond interest and retirement fund. So as you can see, moving forward, it would be, these are large amounts that would be counted against the game protection fund. So in future years, we would need to make considerations of how we would be able to pay for these projects that we would like to plan and how we would pay for them. And most likely that would require a license fee increase. So in fiscal year 25, the total amount requested is $7 million. Again, 5 million of this is from the game protection fund. 2.5 million would either be for Fenton or Snow Lake, and 2.5 million for Eagle Nest Dam. These dam restoration projects can get very expensive. They require a lot of funding. The other 1.5 million is from the Big Game Enhancement Fund for a total of 7 million. And in FY26, we would request 6.5 million out of the Game Protection Fund for a total of 8.5 million to include Habitat Management Funds of 1 million and 1 million from the Sites Act. Again, this is for the dredging of Fenton and Snow Lake and for a possible new office complex. So like I said earlier, the capital outlay request is due to be submitted at DFA by July 1st. The Department of Finance and the Legislative Finance Committee will have a hearing in October to discuss our plan request, and we'll either approve or disapprove any of our planned funding. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Chief Paul Varela. I'm going to open this up to the commissioners, and I welcome Vice Chair Salazar Henry to kick off the questions and comments.
Sorry about that. Because I was privy to a lot of the raw data that comprised the slides, I think there's some comments that I think that are important that I'd just like to make sure that the commission and members of our public understand. Some of the takeaways from what Paul's presentation showed was that non-residents do provide a large share of the department's revenue. They don't buy as many licenses, but the cost is large enough that the smaller portion of licenses that they do buy brings in a huge share of the money that the department is reliant upon. As usual, elk, deer, and fishing are our primary drivers of license sales. That's where all our money primarily has come from. All the other sales from antelope or oryx or everything else is just, it is not a real moneymaker. I view it as a real opportunity for hunting those species. Funds other than the Game Protection Fund, I just want to remind everybody, there are statutes that are tied into those funds that dictate how they can be spent. And unlike the Game Protection Fund, that's very broad in its mission, it's the general operating fund. So that pays for all the things that cannot fit into those specific statutory requirements in the other funds. I want to remind everybody that because at any point in time you see a large cash balance, when you sum up every one of our funds, it doesn't mean that that's available to spend. If you notice on some of Paul's slides, when he's talking about the budgets, some of that money is obligated in other ways through encumbrances or restricted through the use of the statute, and also limited by the approval of the budget process. We may want to obligate every nickel that comes in for the Sites Act through the sale of Sites Act stamps, but that the legislature passes our budget. We approve the budget that will be submitted, but the legislature has the authority to approve our budget. I want to remind everybody else, Game and Fish is an enterprise agency. It is very unique in state government. It's got statutes that allow it to own property, so they have a lot of money that's invested in maintenance, among other things. And because Paul mentioned that 25% cash balance carryover from fiscal year to fiscal year is very important, because they're an enterprise agency, because license sales and all the things that make up their revenue base does not come in like a general fund agency who gets 1/12, 1/12, 1/12 every month like clockwork. The other important point to note is that the Game Department is not a recipient of any general fund money. There are no general tax monies that come in from the state of New Mexico. And so they are very prudent. I believe they always have been, no matter who's been at the helm. I think they've always been very prudent about the decisions they make about spending money. I'll have a caveat to that in a minute, but for the most part, I think they have a good handle on what should be happening and how to take care of the money. My last comment will be on the capital projects plan. One of the things we did in the finance committee was shift some things around, such as building buildings over to later years in order to push forward on the ground projects that actually benefit outdoor recreationists more than they do a person sitting in the office. The previous commission, I think, blew through probably $17 million in building new buildings. It was their decision to make, but we're left with trying to figure out and find money to fund hatchery renovations, to do more habitat projects because of climate change. And that $17 million would have been great to have in our pockets to do those things. We don't have them. So my personal preference is to put more money on the ground and in places where the people who buy our licenses are actually getting the benefit of those dollars since they contributed in the first place. So I just want to thank the director and his staff and Chief Varela for putting this information forward. And those are my only comments.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any of the commissioners? Comments?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Besbach.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chief Varela, for going through that. I wanted to highlight one thing you brought up in one of your slides, which was the new game hunting license requirement that brought in. Was it? Could you tell me how much that brought in again, additional revenue?
Yes, Madam Chair, Commissioner Besbach, it brought in an additional 1.4 million.
Okay, and did that account for federal match or just straight license sales itself?
That was just straight license sales itself.
Okay, so it brought in more, we could safely say more than an additional 1.4 million, which has been really important in some tough times here to kind of extend the department. And I think it's worth giving a thank you to some of our hunting and fishing oriented groups who really supported that. They made it possible in legislation in 2011, and the previous commission, through a lot of advocacy of our sportsman groups, finally implemented that much more recently. But that's been important, and I think it shows just the willingness to support conservation by hunters and anglers, that they will repeatedly step up and say we want to contribute more. And that was just a good update to bring us in line with other states to kind of capture some of the folks who are applying but maybe not hunting. And it does provide an extra opportunity for small game too. So I think that's been really important. I just want to take a chance to thank, I know the Wildlife Federation, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, a bunch of groups really supported that, and I wanted to pause and say thank you for that. And then follow-up question: what do you project for our federal reimbursement this year? Do you care to make a guess there?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Besbach, if I had to guess, I think it would be in the $15 million range. I think it's going to be similar to what we collected. Well, similar to what we collected in the previous fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's worth noting with the economic downturn we've had, that we're looking at potentially there. I think we know a bit about a surge of ammunition and firearm sales, so that's been beneficial for our revenue, I think. And so it's just worth noting that despite the economic downturn, we do have, that's an estimate that we'll have kind of a flat revenue from the federal side at least. And then I guess the last thing I want to just two last things to emphasize, and one is that sometimes we talk about a license fee increase, but I think it's worth noting that it's not an increase we're talking about. It's the way the system is we had our last adjustment in 2006, and we do not adjust for inflation each year. So in reality, our revenue has gotten less and less and less every year since 2006. So we've been operating on a declining budget since 2006. And some states have started to move, and I think we would be wise to look at that towards the ability to adjust a little more frequently rather than going to the legislature every 15 years with a gigantic adjustment. And so, but I think we see a lot of support from our licensed buyers for those adjustments and having to catch up to inflation eventually. And then lastly, I think this capital plan is good. I just want to emphasize that it's a 5-year plan, but we approve it yearly. So there is the opportunity for adjustments, you know, and if we can kind of see if we don't get the opportunity to adjust for inflation, we can lose a lot of these needed projects, whether it's dam safety or dredging lakes where people love to fish and be able to fish, or the climate change, you know, work we do with, well, climate change needed work we do with forest restoration projects that really help avoid catastrophic wildfire, help wildlife. So I think it's just a glimpse, but it's really important to look at what the needs, really strong needs we have on there. So yeah, thank you, Chief Farrell.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Commissioner Vesbach. Commissioner Bates, Commissioner Kramer, any comments, questions?
No further comments. I think the director's really done a great job with his team and input from the vice chair and Commissioner Vesbach on the Finance Committee as well, in prioritizing funding. I think there's an awful lot of detail behind the scenes that wasn't highlighted on these top line charts. That's by design, just from time constraints, but a lot of data-driven decisions in here. Some longer-term projections. We can have very conservative plans, and have very aggressive plans for spending. I think what's presented today is a very realistic budget over the next 5 years that addresses some immediate needs with plans over the next 5 years. As Commissioner Vesbach said, depending on revenues and expenses that may fluctuate, which we can't quantify today, we will have an opportunity to address that ongoing. So I guess there's no discussion. I just moved to approve the FY22 and FY26 capital plan as presented by the department.
Oh, very good. That is a motion. Before we do that motion, let me make one comment. This is the first time that I have seen this data. Unfortunately, like the vice chair, I've not been privy to the raw data. I did appreciate Chief Varela's presentation. It was very informative and it was very helpful. So I want to say thank you to him and to the director and the rest of the team in putting this information together. So that said, I'm going to rely on the commissioners. I hear a motion from Commissioner Bates. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Kramer. Director Sloan, Director Mike Sloan, could you please take a vote by roll call?
Commissioner Vesbach.
Yes.
Excuse me. Commissioner Souls.
Aye.
Commissioner Kramer.
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Vice Chair Salazar Henry.
Yes.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Very good. Thank you, Director Sloan. Let's move. Well, it's 12:24. Assistant Attorney General Valerie Joe. I don't think our next agenda item is going to be 5 minutes. This is Chad Nelson on his request to recognize the United States Sportsman Alliance as a qualified nonprofit organization. Can we run a few minutes late before we get into an executive session, because we also have public comment?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Valerie Joe, Assistant Attorney General for the Attorney General's Office. Our contact with the Attorney General's Office is available till 1:45. So if you want to break now and go into that session and then come out, that's fine. But there is a hard stop at 1:45 for the executive session.
I'm going to leave that open to the commissioners. My recommendation is that we proceed with the agenda. I don't want to rush us through the rest of the agenda. I didn't hear from Lance Cherry that we had many people on standby for public comment, but it would be very good to hear from Chief Chad Nelson, and then I think just proceeding as is fine. Vice Chair, do you have any objections, or other commissioners?
Madam Chair, the only comment I just need to make sure we're clear on is that if we break to go to executive session, we've already have an approved agenda. Do we have to go back and amend the agenda to swap that out with something else? Or are you saying we're just going to keep going until we get to that agenda item? I'm just not clear on what's happening.
As I understand it, Vice Chair, what we're going to do is we're going to continue with the agenda as is. There's no amendment to the agenda. The only caveat is that one of the attorneys in the executive session has to leave at 1:45, which I don't think is a problem. That's okay. So very good. Okay, very good. So let's proceed now, since we have completed item number 10. Let's proceed to item number 11. This is Assistant Chief Chad Nelson speaking on the request to recognize the U.S. Sportsman Alliance as a qualified nonprofit organization. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and we can see my presentation okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, I am here to present the United Special Sportsman Alliance as a nonprofit organization that is seeking approval for two different programs. They are seeking approval to accept reserved elk hunting licenses as a wish granting organization, and also donated hunting licenses. So state law 17.3.13.5 authorizes the State Game Commission to reserve no more than 2 elk licenses per year for sale to persons under the age of 21 who have a life-threatening illness and who are qualified through a nonprofit wish-granting organization that is approved by the Commission. The second portion that they are applying for approval for is as a nonprofit organization to receive donated hunting licenses. 17.3.7G authorizes the director to transfer a hunting license to a nonprofit organization approved by the State Game Commission. That law is clarified by NMAC 1931.3, which specifies that in order to be approved by the commission to accept donated hunting licenses, a nonprofit organization has to demonstrate their history and ability to promote hunting, fishing, or trapping in New Mexico in order to receive those licenses for transfer to eligible recipients. So again, this 17.3.7 establishes the requirements for transfers and refunds of licenses. If people do not qualify under those provisions, then they can donate the license to an approved nonprofit for transfer to an eligible recipient. And again, that is youths and resident veterans and first responders. So United Special Sportsman Alliance has provided the department with documentation of their nonprofit status, and they have demonstrated their status as a wish granting organization, as well as their ability to promote hunting in New Mexico. They also have already registered with the New Mexico Attorney General's office as a New Mexico nonprofit organization. So with that, I will stand for any questions. I guess I also should point out, I don't know if Bridget O'Donoghue is here and wished to speak on behalf of the United Special Sportsman Alliance or not. We may or may not have time for that.
Assistant Chief Chad Nelson, I also see a comment, and maybe Lance Cherry can assist with this. Jeff Young from Sandia Park. Do you wish to submit a comment?
Madam Chair, he's actually wishing to just provide comment back to the Mentored Youth Hunt program.
And so we'll do that at the general public comment. Is that what you're saying?
We can do that then.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay. Commissioners, any other comments or questions for Assistant Chief Chad? Well, I believe this is an action item. Do I have a motion?
Sure. I'll move to approve United Special Sportsman Alliance as a qualified nonprofit organization to receive donated hunting licenses or permits, and as a qualified nonprofit wish granting organization to receive alcohol licenses pursuant to 17-3-13.5 NMSA 1978.
Thank you, Commissioner Bates. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner. Director Sloan, can we please have a roll call for a vote?
Commissioner Vespa,
Yes.
Commissioner Souls, I have lost Commissioner Souls.
Yes. Yeah.
We did.
Commissioner no, Commissioner Kramer,
Yes.
Commissioner Bates,
Yes.
Vice Chair Salazar Henry,
Yes.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Director. Yes, Commissioner Souls is having internet connections. I've been communicating with him offline, and there are some issues going on with his cell phone. He's having to use two. So thank you. That motion passes and so approved. Let us now proceed to item number 12, general public comments. These are comments that are typically limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We will try and have public comments not to exceed 30 minutes, as so noted in our agenda. At the conclusion of 30 minutes or maybe less, the public comment will end. Individuals may only take comment to these agenda items that we have presented today. And we look forward to hearing from persons that are with us. Lance Cherry, I turn this over to you.
Okay. If any of the attendees wish to speak during this public comment period, I'd ask that you raise your hand so that we can identify you. And I'm going to attempt to start off by just bringing Jeff Young in. Jeff Young, we're going to allow you to talk.
Lance, while you're doing that, you might explain to folks how to raise their hand.
Okay. So to raise your hand, you should have a button depending on which side you're using. Sometimes you have to click a more menu. Sometimes it's just right over the top of your screen. And Jeff Young, you've been allowed to talk. You would have to just unmute yourself if you wish to speak. It doesn't appear that he's able to do that.
Well, in the alternative, I want to say thank you to Jeff Young because he did reach out to us. And I believe his chat was presented to all panelists, all members of the commission. So Lance Cherry, if you could, for the record, read into the record his statement to the panelists. Maybe that's an alternative.
I could do that, but it looks like he just connected.
Oh, okay.
Jeff, are you there? Well, we'll go to the alternative. So from Jeff Young from Sandia Park, he said, before Hunter Ed changes are approved, please allow the public an opportunity to comment. I have input as a Hunter Ed instructor that I will provide to the commission in an email, and I fully support Hunter Ed, but want to hear more and be heard.
And Madam Chair, if I might, I guess I would point out just for folks listening out there that all of the rules presented today, this is the initiation. This is bringing it to the commission to say, hey, we'd like to go make these changes. There will be public input after that. There'll be another commission meeting where it's formally presented, and then probably a third at which there'll be a hearing. So this is just the beginning of the process, not the end.
Thank you, Director Sloan. That is a very good point of clarification. But in the spirit of our agenda, we did leave it open to any public comment, general public comment. So I agree. Your response is very informative, but I also thank you, Jeff Young, for his comments. Did we have something else, Lance, Cherry?
And Madam Chair, that is it. No one has requested to speak at this time.
I did see a chat from David Kennecke.
That was much earlier today, and he has stepped away, but has provided some comment that we will share with you.
Right, and his comment pertains to the Hunter Ed program as well.
Correct.
Okay, very good. No further public comment?
No further comments.
Okay, well then, in that case, it is now 12:38, and we can move on to our agenda item number 13. This is where we will move into the executive session, where the commissioners will vote on whether to adjourn into executive session. On the agenda, we have, pursuant to section 10:15-1, clause H7, the New Mexico statutes annotated 1978, attorney-client privilege litigation update. It is discussion. There are several items to be discussed. One, Michael Sloan, Department of Game and Fish versus New Mexico State Game Commission, First Judicial District Court. Two, Adobe Whitewater Club of New Mexico, New Mexico Wildlife Federation, and New Mexico Chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers versus Honorable Michelle Lujan Grisham, Governor and State Game Commission, Supreme Court. There are several other pleadings relating to that cause of action. The brief of New Mexico Wilderness Alliance, League of United Latin American Citizens, the Hispano Roundtable of New Mexico, Hispanics Enjoying Camping, Hunting, and the Outdoors, and the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project is amicus curiae in support of petitioner's petition of mandamus. Also, petitioner's consolidated reply brief in support of petition for writ of mandamus. Also, stipulated motion for an order for dismissal of Honorable Michelle Lujan Grisham, Governor, and for Senator Tom Udall and Senator Martin Heinrichs, notice of conditionally filed proposed memorandum brief as amici curiae. The third cause of action is Rancho del Oso Pardo, Inc., Riverbend Ranch, LLC, and Chama 3, LLC, doing business as Cañones Creek Ranch versus New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, Director Michael Sloan, Director of the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, in his individual and official capacity, and the New Mexico Game Commission et al. Also related to that cause of action is a pleading, notice of filing, notice of removal in U.S. District Court in New Mexico. Also, notice of removal of Michael Sloan, New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, from First Judicial District Court. Also, please take notice that this case has been randomly assigned to U.S. Magistrate Judge Stephen C. Yarbrough to conduct dispositive proceedings in this matter, including motions and trial. Also, notice of appearance by Mark L. Ish on behalf of all plaintiffs. Also, appendix supplement regarding notice of removal, civil cover sheet. Also, please take notice that this case has been reassigned to Magistrate Judge Curtin Khalsa as the pretrial judge. Also, motion to stay all proceedings by the New Mexico Game Commission. Also, motion to dismiss by New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. Also, motion to dismiss supporting memorandum by New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. Also, a motion to stay by New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. Also, a motion to stay regarding the motion to stay supporting memorandum by New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. Also, the notice of consent submission deadline. Also, the notice of New Mexico Department of Game and Fish filing of record before the First Judicial District. Also, order finding good cause to delay scheduling order by Magistrate Judge Curtin Khalsa. Also, consent to proceed before a U.S. Magistrate Judge. Also, order for plaintiff to file Local Rule 7.14 notice. Also, notice of extension to file reply brief by plaintiffs. Also, plaintiff's response to motions to stay. Also, plaintiff's response to defendant's motion to dismiss. And then the fourth cause of action is the Fen Farm and Three Rivers Cattle Ltd. Company, Limited Company liability versus New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. Director Michael Sloan, Director of the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, in his individual official capacity in the New Mexico State or the New Mexico Game Commission et al. Relating our pleadings verified petition for writ of mandamus, also notice of filing notice of removal in U.S. District Court, New Mexico. So I believe I properly read that into the record. Director Sloan, Vice Chair Salazar Henry, and commissioners, do we need a motion to go into the executive session? And I see some nods from the commissioners. So Director Sloan, commissioners, do I have a motion from one of you?
So moved.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Vespach. All right. Director Sloan, are you ready to take a vote?
I am.
Thank you.
Commissioner Vespach,
Yes.
Commissioner Souls, if you're with us. No. Commissioner Kramer,
Yes.
Commissioner Bates,
Yes.
Vice Chair Salazar Henry,
Yes.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Director Sloan. For the record, let it reflect that it is 12:45 p.m. We are going to excuse ourselves and we will be back online immediately after the session. Thank you. It's now 2:05 p.m. on Thursday, June 25th. And we are returning from our executive session. If you'd like to do a roll call, and then we will proceed with further.
Commissioner Vespach,
I'm here.
Commissioner Souls, Commissioner Lopez, Commissioner Kramer,
Here.
Commissioner Bates,
Here.
Vice Chair Salazar Henry,
Here.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Director Sloan. I just realized what could be causing the problem, Lance Cherry, and it is not at your end. I happen to have a scam or spam software, and I think what happened is that spam software shut down my video. I think that's what may have happened. It's done that before. So for the record, we are returning to our meeting. This is agenda item number 14, return from executive session. The commission at its discretion may take action on any of the items discussed during the executive session upon returning to the public session. I want to make it very clear for the record that during the executive session, until we just resumed, the commissioners did not speak to discuss, address any matters that are not listed on our agenda. The sole topic and discussion and those matters are listed in agenda item number 13. So that was our sole discussion, and no action. Well, I take that back. Okay. Assistant Attorney General Valerie Jo, in the meeting, in the executive session, I promised the commissioners and the attorneys in the executive session to take certain action. Do I need to disclose them at this point?
This is Valerie Jo. No, it was related to the litigation.
Okay, very good.
So you do not require a vote. It is just your prerogative as the chair to take the next step. I believe you were just informing those on the commission what you plan to do next.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I have to be very careful because I want to make it very clear that the commissioners, this body, this group of 7 commissioners, take our roles and responsibilities very seriously. We are very honored to work on behalf of the state, appointed by the state laws, the governor, and working with the Department of Game and Fish. So I want to have as much transparency as possible. Okay, so moving on, the last agenda item is adjournment, which is a discussion about the date of our next meeting. I believe we have on our website, the Department of Game and Fish website, our next meeting is August 13th. I want to make a note for the record and for the commissioners that I am unavailable on Thursday, August 13th. I will be traveling to Crested Butte, Colorado on that day. I would like to ask if all of you would be willing to change our commission meeting to Wednesday, August 12th.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Vice Chair Salazar.
I think because generally the August meeting is tied to the budget and the budget development that needs to be prepped and sent over to the Department of Finance, I think maybe the question should be posed to the director because his staff is the people that will be most impacted.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Director Sloan?
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, I appreciate that. I think it would be better if we could move the meeting later rather than earlier to facilitate time for budget development and coordination with individual commissioners.
Okay, so if all of the commissioners and the director, Department of Game and Fish, if you could look at your calendar for August. I am out of town, traveling to New York to assist our daughter who's going to go to school in New York. Will not be returning to the state. I would not be available until Monday, August 24th.
Ooh.
I'm free that week.
Whoa.
That unfortunately starts to get a little bit late.
Okay.
August is the narrowest window we have to try and get enough time to get things developed and then enough time to get it approved and then submitted.
Well, I'm asking for 1 day move up from the 13th through the 12th. If it can't be moved up to the 12th by 1 day, then keep it on the 13th, but I'm not here the week of the 17th.
The other issue, Madam Chair, the other issue with moving the commission meeting earlier is we wouldn't be able to get the migratory bird rule in place.
Ah, very good. Okay. How about August 20th or 21st?
So, Madam Chair, I'm afraid we're stuck with the 13th based on several texts I've now received regarding the migratory bird rule, dove season, and just the timeline. I don't know what else to say other than that's the date we're kind of stuck with.
Okay, very good. Well, Vice Chair, there's a very good likelihood that you will need to chair the meeting on Thursday, August 13th.
Okay. I can
All right.
do that.
And commissioners, I hope all of you are also available on the 13th, and hopefully we will have a quorum.
Madam Chair, can I recommend that if you are not going to be able to be there on the 13th for sure, that you do at least meet with the department staff to go over the budget presentation, so we will know your thoughts before you leave?
Absolutely. That I will certainly do that. Is there any other discussion before we adjourn? Okay, well, very good. I want to say thank you to everyone, commissioners, Director Sloan, Department of Game and Fish, and members of our public. Thank you for being present here today, and thank you for your support and your interest in our mission. Everybody, you have a very good day.
Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned. Oh, do we need a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
It's an action item. Okay, who's the second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Kramer. Director Sloan, can we have a vote, please?
Commissioner Vesbach.
Yes.
Commissioner Kramer.
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Vice Chair Salazar Henry.
Yes.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Yes.
You are adjourned.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Goodbye.